Allen to speak to and move the motion. 13 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'll begin by moving the motion in my name and saying how delighted I am to be opening this debate for the Government on the important topic of early learning and childcare and this Government's plans to transform provision in Scotland. The early emphasis that we are placing on this topic and the centrality with which we centred it in our manifesto, I hope will underline to the Chamber the importance that the Government places both on the precious early years of a child's life and the need for high-quality childcare as a means of growing our economy. Presiding Officer, before we begin the debate and before we delve into the detail of what is an exciting expansion project, I should like to make a few acknowledgements. Firstly, and I suppose personally, to the highly qualified, professional and I have to say loving childminders who support me to be here today and to lead this work for the Government. I'm sure that my wee Sorley is out in the sun just now, learning through play and spending time with his pals. And I want to extend that personal thanks to all of the early learning and childcare professionals who are doing that very job the length and breadth of Scotland. I saw some of this firsthand this morning when I visited Closton Primary School's Breakfast Club before attending the Hillsland Early Learning and Childcare Centre. I don't think it should be a controversy to say that I can think of fewer more important jobs in our country than supporting the care and development of our children. So I want to sincerely thank them and repeat I absolutely will in a moment. I just want to sincerely thank them and repeat how much the Minister and I, also a working mammy, look forward to working with them. And I'll take Willie Rennie.
I echo that appreciation for the work that they do. But if she believes that, will she finally tackle the difference in the pay rates between the PVI sector, the private, voluntary and independent sector, and the council sector? Because staff are paid differently, massively differently, for doing exactly the same job. So will the Government finally get a grip of this problem?
When it comes to pay, Presiding Officer, I'm really proud that Scotland's the only part of the UK that, through its funding for the funded ELC, creates the circumstances where the real living wage can be paid. But I understand the call for parity. And of course, as we take on what is a massive expansion project, all of these aspects will be taken into account. And I'll work with COSLA and with the sector on that. I also wanted to just make it very briefly, yes.
Did I understand the Cabinet Secretary to say correctly that the issue of the lack of parity that has been identified by Willie Rennie and which the Cabinet Secretary has acknowledged, that will be addressed as part of this revised approach to this policy?
Presiding Officer, we are in the early days of what is a significant expansion project, and simply what I say to the Chamber is that I am open-minded about learning on the delivery of 1140 as we work to expand the provision, and pay and rates and flexibility will, among many other issues, will be taken into account. But I did want to make a second acknowledgement, and that was to... yes, absolutely.
The difficulty is that our predecessors have been open-minded for years on this, and we haven't made any progress on it. So we need more than open-mindedness and open doors. We need a solution to it.
I don't think that it's realistic to say that progress hasn't been made. I made my first response to Willie Rennie, noting that Scotland's the only place in the UK that funds the real living wage, because we've put fair work at the centre of our expansion to 1140. What I simply say to members across the Chamber today is that I understand there are a number of areas that we need to learn from in 1140, and that I will discuss that with them. And that is a broad commitment. But I wanted to make an acknowledgement of parents and carers, Presiding Officer, because they are wrestling every day with the joys and challenges of raising children, doing that with varying support networks, doing it in a cost of living crisis, but doing it always to their best. And again, I saw that this morning, and I want to thank them for that. But that allows me to move on and say that in my first debate as Cabinet Secretary for Education, Culture and Gaelic, I am so proud to take over this area, which has been given so much priority by the Scottish Government through the baby box, providing those essentials for the first 6 months of life, to this transformational 1140 childcare offer, from breakfast and after-school club investment, free school meal provision, investment in health visiting, family nurse partnerships, supporting women in breastfeeding, and of course the groundbreaking Scottish Child Payment. We are taking and building the blocks of success for children in Scotland, and I'm very proud of that. And on that note, my colleague Shirley-Anne Somerville, who was in the chamber speaking before me, published our Bringing Hope, Building Futures just prior to parliamentary dissolution, and this sets out the concrete action that we will take to in pursuit of our goal of eradicating child poverty in Scotland, and which we estimate will keep 100,000 children out of relative poverty this year. Surely a goal we can all get behind, Presiding Officer. And of course, that plan, in its aim of eradicating child poverty, is absolutely clear that supporting parents and carers who are currently locked out of the labour market to enter the labour market and to work is a really important part of our work. We know that these barriers exist particularly for women, who are more likely to take on caring responsibilities, to reduce their working hours, or to feel that they can't work at all because it doesn't make financial sense. Now, I want to say, Presiding Officer, that is fine if that's what families choose to do, but it's not fine if it's not a choice, and I have that at the forefront of my mind as well. So we will take action to remove these barriers, not only because it's the right thing for families, but because it's the right thing for our economy. So I want to look for a moment at the government's record in childcare, what we have been delivering to date, that universal early learning and childcare offer for every 3- and 4-year-old and for around a quarter of 2-year-olds. They're often referred to as eligible 2-year-olds, but, Presiding Officer, I prefer what Edinburgh City Council called or termed them to me today, the terrific 2s. And we're delivering that through an investment of around £1 billion a year. And that's worth about £6,400 per family, per eligible child, which I think we would all agree is a sizeable contribution to family budgets. And it has to be said that moving from the around 600 hours that we inherited when we came to government to delivering the 1,140, which parents have been benefiting from since 2021, is a massive achievement. But we're also clear, Presiding Officer, that now is the time to move on to the next transformational change in provision. Yes, absolutely.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for giving way on that point. Of course, the Scottish Government announced to expand funded childcare from 9 months onwards back in 2023. Will the Cabinet Secretary endeavour to give an update on what progress has been made since that promise?
I absolutely will, Presiding Officer, and I was going to come on later on, but I can address it now to talk about some of the work we've been doing in our priority communities, for example, working with our 6 priority families and testing the rollout of childcare as it's needed in different circumstances, whether that's communities affected by poverty, whether it's children with disabilities. We've been taking forward that work, and it will now inform the expansion of childcare, which I should say, to give Parliament the detail, although I'm sure they are acquainted, is to support every child in the country with the choice of childcare from 9 months to the end of primary school, and to do that by the end of this Parliament. Importantly, that's to be provided 52 weeks a year and will be designed to fit around families, rather than expecting families to fit around the system. Now, I have to say, Presiding Officer, this is a substantial project. It will take a Team Scotland approach. And on that note of working together, I was really pleased to see the importance of early learning and childcare featuring in most of the manifestos for parties running up to the election. I hear concerns from Green colleagues about cross-border placements and the variation in funded ELC eligibility dates when a child turns 3. And I commit today to working on these issues as we develop the expanded offer. My colleagues have already stated, and I maintain, that statutory guidance is clear. Wherever possible, families who are accessing cross-border placement should be treated on the same basis as families accessing local provision. And then on the question of when a 3-year-old begins, I'm very sympathetic to this, although I think there are practical issues we have to take into account. For example, how manageable it is for staff to have an intake, say, every week or every day. But that's a practical consideration that we have to make, and I'll be working with the Greens and COSLA on that. And we'll be supporting your amendments today on that basis. We'll also be supporting Labour's amendment, and I look forward to hearing their contributions. I want to note the Liberal Democrats' desire to see a focus on support for working families only. I don't fail to understand the reasons behind it, and I want to work with you on it to understand more about what you're looking to achieve. But I have to say, firstly, we can't fail to understand how important it is to have childcare to find work and to sustain work. And I think, secondly, there's a really important point to make here, which is that we shouldn't have a system which denies children whose parents aren't working the important early learning opportunities that are provided here, particularly if we think that they might be the children who could benefit most from it. So I just say that as an early point of principle, but I do look forward to working with the Lib Dems on it. And of course, Presiding Officer, as we develop the provision, we will, as I have said to a number of members, draw on the successes of 1140 and be clear about where there are opportunities for improvement. Yes, I will.
The previous expansion that you've mentioned a few times now of 1140 hours required the addition of 4,000 full-time equivalent staff. So if these proposals aren't tied specifically to a skills training pathway for our domestic workforce, will you not simply just be legislating a skills shortage into existence?
So the member is absolutely right to point out the importance of the workforce here. This workforce, who are mainly women, are the single most important factor in whether or not good high-quality early learning and childcare is provided. Now, the rollout of 1140 has actually seen the number of staff necessarily grow, but we're very open-minded and clear-eyed about the fact that that will have to happen once again as we expand it. We know uptake's been good, Presiding Officer. A census published in 2025 shows that uptake is nearly universal for 3- and 4-year-olds, with almost every child taking up their registered hours. We also know that the vast majority of parents or carers are satisfied with the quality of ELC. I'm getting the time back, haven't I, Presiding Officer? Yes, of course I will.
I'm grateful to the Cabinet Secretary for giving way. As a follow-up to the previous question, and in relation to what she's currently saying, what are the government's estimates on the number of additional staff that will be required, and how much does the government estimate the total cost of the expansion will be over the lifetime of this Parliament?
So we set out in our manifesto an estimate of around 500 million, but these are early days of the development of the policy within government, so both estimated costs, the estimate requirements in terms of the workforce, these will all be developed in due course. And I would just remind Parliament that the commitment is to have completed this by the end of the 5-year period. This is a huge piece of work and we're all going to have to work together on it, and it's in early course just now. But, Presiding Officer, I was going to mention the DIFLI report that we commissioned and which reported recently, which I think set out that really important perspective on what's worked and what needs to be improved. I'm short of time, but there's a couple of bits I just wanted to draw out. Firstly, it was clear that it's had a really important impact on maternal employment, something that is very important. And the other point I wanted to draw out, and this really struck me, was that it demonstrated that for an eligible 2-year-old, by the time they've undertaken a year, there is little developmental difference that can be observed between them and their 3-year-old peer who was starting on the universal offer. I see that as a really important bit of success for the project. But of course, as colleagues have said, recruitment, skills development, rates, flexibility, additional support needs, practical issues of rollout, costs, all of this is to be developed. And I really sincerely look forward to working with colleagues across the chamber on this project. Now, I have probably rightly focused my remarks on 1140, but there's a huge amount of other work the government's both completed and looking to take forward, with the expansion of breakfast clubs, with our extra time programme and with our work in those priority communities, which it's worth noting are Clackmannanshire, Dundee, Fife, Glasgow, Inverclyde and Shetland, something which we've deliberately done to help us understand how best this works across different demographies in Scotland. But, Presiding Officer, I will bring my remarks to a close so that we can have a good and fulsome debate. It has to be said, as I know you'll know from your previous role, we are facing some of the most financial fiscal conditions since devolution. So are households in Scotland. And so, therefore, every penny that we spend, we have to make work for the people of Scotland. I believe, and the government believes, that expanding childcare is there's a strong case for that. It reduces inequalities, it tackles poverty, and it provides new economic opportunities across the country. So it's an ambitious but vital task. I know there's consensus across the chamber, and I really look forward to getting to work with colleagues, with the Minister, to deliver this for Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. I now call on Catherine Sangster to speak to and move Amendment 128.2. 5 minutes, and I would remind the Chamber that this is the first speech given by Catherine Sangster, so there will be no interruptions or interventions.
Presiding Officer, it is a huge privilege to make my maiden speech as Scottish Labour and Cooperative MSP for Edinburgh and Lothians East. I want to begin by thanking the voters across our communities who placed their trust in Scottish Labour and in me. And to those who ultimately decided to put their cross elsewhere, thank you too for our conversations and for sharing your challenges with me. Because politics should not just take place online or in this chamber, but it should take place on doorsteps, in community meetings and in conversations with our neighbours. This is where mistrust of politics and politicians can be overcome, consensus can be reached and where progress is made. While the election result is settled, the challenges facing Scotland are not. The need to tackle deep-seated issues in Scotland remain as urgent today as it was during the campaign, and this Parliament must rise to that challenge. I want to pay tribute to Sarah Boyack, who represented the region before me, for her years of public service, her commitment to the Labour movement and her wise counsel to me over many years. Thank you also to Chris Murray MP, campaigning by my side and proving that Westminster and Holyrood can sometimes work together. Politics is indeed a team effort. I owe a huge debt of gratitude to the people who supported me over the last few years. You know who you are. Thank you. Not only for your belief in me, but for your belief that Scotland can be a fairer, better country. I am especially proud to represent a region that has been my home for most of my adult life. Over the years, I've made so many friends here, raised my family here and worked here. I know the communities of Leith, Portobello, Musselburgh, Walford and Elphinstone not simply as places on a map, but as places who welcomed me and my family, and ones full of warmth, resilience and enormous potential. One of the first votes I cast was for the establishment of a Scottish Parliament, never imagining then that one day I would stand in this chamber. I believe deeply in the power of devolved government to improve people's lives. But good intentions alone are not enough. Government must deliver in practice. A policy can't just sound good in a campaign leaflet, it must make the everyday lives of working families better. And I am therefore so pleased that my maiden speech comes in a debate on childcare. My own involvement in politics began campaigning for fairer access to childcare for working parents some 10 years ago, and many of the problems parents faced then are still with us today. Across Scotland and the Lothians, parents speak about nursery costs consuming huge chunks of household income, long waiting lists, inflexible hours and free childcare that doesn't actually fully cover the cost. For many families, childcare determines whether a parent can return to work, increase their hours or progress in their careers. So whilst I welcome the commitment to expanding childcare provision, we must address the pressures that families are under now. In Edinburgh, restrictions on cross-boundary nursery placements have affected families from East Lothian and Mid Lothian who need childcare close to where they work. Parents have lost access to nurseries that match commuting patterns and working hours, or they've lost funding where children were happy and settled. And those points speak to a wider challenge at the heart of Scotland's childcare system, aligning national ambition with local delivery and the everyday realities facing working parents. Childcare is one of the most important investments we can make in Scotland's future. When childcare works, parents can participate fully in the workplace, women are more able to continue their careers, and children get the best possible start in life. But for too many families, that is not the reality. So on behalf of the families and staff who need change, we will be holding the SNP to account in keeping their promise on actually delivering childcare policy in this Parliament. The SNP brought forward this debate, and our questions are simple. When will it happen and how will it happen? Scottish Labour have set up their own plan to reduce the cost of childcare for working parents, improving flexibility of the system, supporting childminders and giving parents more choice and control. A failure to tackle these matters will be a missed opportunity that no family can afford. Turning to the motion in the Cabinet Secretary's name, in the election campaign, the First Minister and his party promised big on expanding childcare. They now have the responsibility to deliver. And remember, parents like me have been raising these issues for 10 years. That's why I'm calling on the Government to fix the issues now, set out a fully costed plan and a timeline for delivery. As a new Member of Parliament, I really hope to contribute constructively and seriously to this work. I came into politics because I believe Scotland deserves a government relentlessly focused on making the country work better for working people. It's the honour of my life to stand here representing Edinburgh and Lothians East. I look forward to serving its people, and I move the motion in my name.
Thank you. I now call on Maggie Chapman to speak to and move Amendment 128.1. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I move the amendment in my name. Every child deserves the best possible start in life. Every parent deserves the chance to work, study, rest or simply breathe without the crushing anxiety of impossible childcare costs. And every childcare worker deserves dignity, fair pay and recognition for the profoundly valuable work that they do. This is why the Scottish Greens were proud to stand in the recent election on a pledge for the biggest expansion of childcare in a generation. We see today's motion as the start of the changes that need to happen, and our amendment pushes the Scottish Government to go further, faster. Because expanding childcare is not simply a matter of economic policy, it's about equality, justice and human dignity. I'm grateful to the Cabinet Secretary for her letter last night, stressing the importance of working together on this vital work, and I welcome her to her new role and can confirm that we in the Greens will work with her to deliver the best for our children and young people and those who care for them. Because we have much work to do. For too long, childcare has been treated as a private burden carried disproportionately by women, rather than as the essential social infrastructure it is. The reality facing families across Scotland is stark. Research from Pregnant Then Screwed found that 2/3 of mothers in Scotland say their childcare costs are the same as or more than their income. Half of mothers said that after paying for childcare, it simply doesn't make sense for them to work. More than 1/3 said they regularly face a choice between paying for childcare and paying for household essentials. These figures should shame us all. Behind every statistic is a person, a family, a mother trying to hold everything together. One mum in Aberdeen said, "I have 2 children, 20 months apart, and pay over £2,000 a month for childcare that isn't even full-time. There is no support. It's exhausting, terrifying." Another, from Angus, said, "Recently I found out that I'm pregnant with my 2nd child, and the joy I should be feeling is dampened by already worrying about childcare cost when it's time to return to work." No parent should describe raising children in Scotland as terrifying. The joy of a new baby shouldn't be marred by anxiety about childcare costs. But this is the reality for many families in one of the wealthiest countries in the world. That is why we in the Scottish Greens are clear: childcare must be universal, flexible and genuinely accessible. Universal provision matters because cliff edges punish families. Means testing leaves people behind. Universal services create dignity, certainty and fairness. And flexibility matters because families' lives are not neatly lived between 9 and 5. Shift workers, rural families, parents of disabled children, single parents, parents working irregular hours. Too many people are locked out of the current system because it was not designed around the reality of modern life. That is why our amendment calls for immediate practical changes. First, ensuring that cross-border placements are available across Scotland, so funding follows the child rather than stopping at arbitrary council boundaries. Second, ensuring that children can access funded hours immediately after their relevant birthday, rather than forcing families in some council areas to wait months for support, costing them thousands. And third, our amendment recognises something too often ignored. Expansion will only work if we properly value the workforce. Because care work is work. Childcare workers are not volunteers propping up a broken system through goodwill and exhaustion. They are skilled professionals carrying enormous responsibility for children's well-being and development. Yet the childcare workforce remains overwhelmingly female, underpaid and undervalued. 95% of that workforce are women, and that poor pay and conditions are driving recruitment and retention problems. If we want a world-class childcare system, we need world-class terms and conditions. That means fair pay across councils and private provision. It means workforce planning, investment in training, particularly around additional support needs. It means collective bargaining that puts power in the hands of workers to negotiate better terms and conditions. And it means recognising childcare not as a cost to be minimised, but as a public good worthy of investment. Because investment in childcare delivers enormous social and economic returns. The evidence is clear. Childcare investment creates jobs, supports women into employment, reduces child poverty and boosts economic participation. Care jobs are also low-carbon jobs. Investment in care creates more jobs and less pollution than equivalent investment in traditional infrastructure. This is feminist economic policy. It is green economic policy. And fundamentally, it is humane economic policy. So let us build a childcare system rooted not in patchwork fixes or postcode lotteries, but in equality, dignity and collective responsibility. A system that values children, values parents, and finally, truly values care. Thank you.
I now call Megan Gallagher to speak to and move Amendment 128.4.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I welcome you to your post, and can I also welcome the Cabinet Secretary to her post. Can I firstly begin on a point of consensus with the Scottish Government? I believe in expanding childcare provision across Scotland. Throughout the last parliamentary session, I repeatedly called on the Government to expand early learning and childcare from 9 months onwards for working parents. And in 2023, I believed that those calls had finally been heard when the former First Minister, Hamza Yousaf, announced a pilot to expand childcare from 9 months onwards. But I've tried repeatedly to establish what progress has been made, but to date there has been little to no clarity of what progress was made since that announcement back in 2023. Now, I do believe that there is an opportunity to reset relationships and work constructively across parties to find solutions. But I do believe the Scottish Government have some answers to explain first. And this is to explain not just to parents, but to this Parliament, why they failed to deliver the expansion that they had previously promised. Because right now, too many parents simply do not trust that this government can deliver. During the election campaign, I had the privilege of serving on a cross-party steering group led by Pregnant Then Screwed Scotland. Together, we discussed how childcare could better support parents, particularly mothers, and explored practical ways to improve the current system. And the one statistic that I've pulled out today from the State of the Nation report that Pregnant and Screwed Scotland conducted should concern the Scottish Government. And that statistic is 66.8% of Scottish mothers did not believe that the Scottish Government would deliver on expanding childcare provision. But behind that statistic is a simple reality. Parents feel that this system is not built around modern day life. Parents are doing everything that they can, I will in a second, to stay in work, provide for their children and build a future for their families. But childcare costs are making it harder, and I'll take the Cabinet Secretary.
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I hear Megan Gallagher's points about delivery and public trust. And I just would take the opportunity very early in the development of this policy to acknowledge the importance of delivery, to put on the record that it's what I want to see happen, and to ask her if she will work with the government constructively so that when the mothers she's talking about are in a few years' time, when this policy is coming to fruition, they can say that the Scottish Parliament delivered for them, including Megan Gallagher's party.
Megan Gallagher.
I said right at the start, Presiding Officer, that I believe in expanding childcare. I will get on to speaking about what I believe it should be expanded to later on in my contribution this afternoon, but I'm more than happy to meet with the Cabinet Secretary on this. I do believe that childcare is fundamental, not just for parents and our families, but for our wider economy as well. And going back to that point that I was raising, because for some families, childcare costs now rival mortgage payments. That's more than £1,000 a month parents are having to cough up in order to pay for childcare across the country. And when families sit down at that kitchen table to work out whether it's financially worthwhile for one parent to return to work, The answer is far too often, no, it's not. For mothers in particular, the choices can feel impossible. Some reduce their hours because childcare costs do not match working patterns. Others believe that the labour market leave the labour market altogether because the cost of childcare wipes out much of their income. And it's not just a family issue, it's an economic issue. When skilled workers are pushed out of employment, Scotland loses talent, productivity and economic growth. If we are serious about growing our economy, childcare must be viewed as economic infrastructure, which is every bit as important as transport or housing. But affordability is only part of the problem. Flexibility matters too. Parents repeatedly tell myself and colleagues who have had the education brief previously that funded hours may exist on paper, but they are often delivered in ways that simply do not reflect the realities of working life. That's shift workers, NHS staff, hospitality workers and parents with irregular hours cannot always make rigid nursery patterns work. But I do want to talk about some of the other issues that are currently faced, not just by parents, but of course the sector itself, because if the government is serious about expansion, they must confront the reality that's facing the childcare sector itself. That's the private, the voluntary and the independent sector, which delivers a substantial proportion of childcare right across Scotland. Because too often, the PVI sector, they do feel like an afterthought, despite being critical to that delivery on the ground. Providers are struggling with rising costs, staffing shortages and government guidance that does not reflect the economic position. There are also serious concerns about the unfair distribution of funding between local authority settings and the PVI sector, which of course Willie Rennie has already mentioned. This is not sustainable. We can't continue as we are and then put an expansion on top of the current model. And if the government wants that mixed market childcare model to survive, the funding must absolutely follow the child fairly and sustainably. Because without the PVI sector, yes, I will.
I'm grateful to my colleague. Would you go as far as to say, unless this issue of the disparity of funding is properly tackled now, then the expansion that we all support will fail?
When I first entered the Parliament back in 2021, presiding officer, this was one of the first issues that came across my desk, was the issue that the PVI sector did not feel part of the overall 1,140-hour package. That's why they were leaving the sector. Childminders did not want to remain part of the sector, and it's one of the issues that needs to be addressed urgently. Presiding officer, I know I'm running out of time, but what I will like to say is, and probably moving towards my conclusion, is that before the ministers make new promises, they must answer a basic question. Who will deliver the expansion? Where will it happen? And how will it be paid for? These are my concerns today. I do believe that we'll probably address these further on in the debate this afternoon, but I welcome the approach so far from the Cabinet Secretary and I will take her up on the offer to meet with her in due course. Thank you.
Megan Gallagher may wish to move the motion amendment in her name.
I move the amendment in my name. Thank you.
Thank you. I call on Willie Rennie to speak to and move Amendment 128.3.
Move that amendment now before I forget, and can actually just begin where Megan Gallagher and Stephen Kerr finished off, because we do need to get the fundamentals of the provision of ELC in Scotland right before we look to expand further. There is a fundamental problem with the PVI sector, who provide the flexibility that many parents are looking for, because many council nurseries simply aren't able to provide that flexibility. So if we want childcare that's suitable for a variety of different family needs, we need to sort out the leakage. And there is significant leakage of experienced staff from the PVI sector to better paid jobs in the council sector, but also you get paid sometimes more in a supermarket than you would in a private nursery. So we need to sort that out in order to make sure that we maintain the quality of the provision, not just the provision itself in the PVI sector, because that is essential for any expansion that comes. But there are a number of other factors that need to be addressed as well. The two-year-old take-up, the terrific twos, as was discussed earlier, that take-up has varied. And even though we've managed to get a relationship with the DWP to share the data that's essential to identify those families, the numbers who are taking it up has dropped within the last period. And we need to reverse that, because that's the group of 2-year-olds that we can make the biggest impact on their life chances if we can get them into that provision at that earlier stage. And then we've already discussed the cross-border placements and the third birthday issue, and accept the point about the practicalities of constant flux on the third birthday. But there is and must be a better way than losing months of provision because you happen to have a third birthday at the wrong period. And then finally, on childminders. Childminders are essential, particularly for very remote and rural areas where it's impossible to have a fully constructed nursery. They provide that flexibility as well for many families that they are looking for. So those issues need to be addressed. But can I actually begin, if it's possible, to thank the Cabinet Secretary and welcome her to her post and her colleague, because now I think we have a ministerial team that can be fully focused on the issue of the promise, following on from, I think, the outstanding contribution that my colleague Duncan Dunlop made yesterday. Because her predecessor was recused from addressing the issues around the promise, now we've got a team that's dedicated to the promise. So I hope we are able to see significant progress in this term on those issues, because that is sorely needed. Now, let me deal with some of the fundamentals about childcare and early learning. And the early learning bit is incredibly important, because sometimes we forget this. It's not just about the hours that we provide, it's about the quality of the provision. And sometimes in the race for expansion, we forget about quality, which is why investing in good quality staff, particularly in the PVI sector, is essential. But we also should remember about the role of families, because there are some families that want to look after their children, and sometimes they feel guilty for not putting them into ELC provision. Now, we should actually welcome the fact that families want to look after their children for longer, because we know from Suzanne Zidek, that very acclaimed academic, that attachment is incredibly important in the early years, because too often children don't have the warmth of a loving relationship. So therefore we should make sure that that is valued in this discussion as well. So I want to make sure that it's, and I think the Cabinet Secretary pointed to this, it's where families want to take up this provision that they should be, but they shouldn't be made guilty for not taking part in it. I remember taking part in a discussion some years ago, and it was run by Save the Children, and everybody was arguing about the expansion of the hours. When are we going to get it? How are we going to get it? How quickly are we going to get it? Is it going to be in my community? And this lone mother stuck up her hand and said, "Why don't you want me to look after my own children?" And you could hear a pin drop, because it actually was something that needed to be said and was important that it was said. But the final element is around about the economy, because we have a major problem with economic inactivity and high levels of unemployment, particularly with women as well, who have had children. So we need to incentivise and encourage. And this is where I disagree fundamentally with the universal approach. Of course, 3- and 4-year-olds, universal, especially in the pre-years just before you go to school, so it can give that extra lift before they get into the education system proper. But we need to make sure that work pays. We need to make sure that when finances are tight, we're using that money to the best way that we possibly can to make sure that work does pay. Because it's essential that everybody in society participates in the economy and society as well. So I'm not going to make any apologies for targeting this, because we are in a real crisis. We know we've got a £5 billion deficit coming down the track in this Parliament, and you wouldn't think it sometimes, because too often we think about spending more money without actually thinking exactly how we should spend it to have the best effect on families, but also on the economy and the finances of the government, because all of this needs to work and needs to work well. And the final element is on after-school clubs. and flexibility, because it's not just about up to the age of 5 we should be talking about here. We should be talking about making sure we support many of those precarious after-school clubs that exist who find it difficult to make ends meet. We need to make sure the extra provision is there for them, particularly in rural areas where the families find it difficult to sustain. So, for all of those reasons, we will work together with the government to make this work. I am desperate to make this work. I've got a long-term commitment to this. Decades back, I have been arguing for expansion of childcare. But we need to make sure that we get the foundations right and we get the expansion right as well.
I now call on Angela Ross to make a first speech.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I would like to congratulate the Cabinet Secretary as well. As this is my first speech, I want to thank the voters of Edinburgh and Lothian East who have put their trust in me, and I will serve them diligently. Just a little bit about myself. So I do have a bit of a background in education, and for nearly 30 years I have been either teaching or involved in instructional design, which has helped organisations, both public and private, globally with learning. And I understand the importance of the structure and appropriate pedagogy for learners of all ages. So this is a particular passion of mine. I'm sure we will all agree that every child deserves the best start in life. And we all agree that childcare matters for families, for work and for child development. But agreeing on the principle is not the same as agreeing on the policy. We cannot keep pretending that a system already under strain can simply be stretched further without consequences. That is why we cannot support the motion as drafted, and in the spirit of being constructive, offer a different approach, one that is targeted, sustainable, and grounded in evidence. We believe the solution should provide choice for parents, because a system without real flexibility and competition risks becoming one where families have fewer, not more, options. We suggest that you should first strengthen the existing 1140-hour offer by prioritising working families and targeting support based on need. We insist that funding follows the child, so that the provision is flexible, transparent and not restricted primarily to council-run delivery. And we recommend a phased approach to expansion with published results and through evaluation at each stage, focusing on ages 2 to 5 alongside early primary, that's primary 1 to 3, wraparound care. A phased approach is going to allow you, just as we do in the business world, that opportunity to reflect, to measure and to understand and assess success before you move on. At Reform, we believe in supporting families but not limiting their options. We believe in childcare that enables work, not a system that ignores cost, capacity or choice. And we must be honest. Childcare supports participation in the labour market, but it does not, on its own, drive economic growth. It is an enabler and not an engine. Before there is any expansion to the existing system, we need to ask whether the present system has delivered as intended. The 1140-hour policy was meant to improve child development, close the attainment gap, and deliver more support for parents in or into work. There has been some progress. I will acknowledge there have been some positive aspects. But overall, the outcomes, as reported, seem to be mixed. The attainment gap certainly has not narrowed, and the impact on employment has been, in the government's own words, modest. At age 2, and I will agree with Willie Rennie, that's where this support, when it's in a very targeted approach, has actually delivered the best signs of improvement. Yet, from the age 3 onwards, the provision becomes more universal, and despite the evidence becoming far less certain, that seems to be the area that is struggling. So the question before Parliament is not whether access to childcare matters, as I'm sure we all agree it does. The question is whether expanding a universal taxpayer-funded model at this scale is the right way to achieve the aims in the motion. We must also look at the reality of the system today. The 1140-hour system is costing close to £1 billion. Without clear and consistent evidence of success, and we have seen private nurseries struggling to deliver funded hours sustainably and falling short and even closing, and a significant loss of childminders and those places they offer. Staff are under incredible pressure, and we've seen surveys from various organisations such as Unison, which have shown the level of stress they are going through. What we know is that in some cases, providers are actually withdrawing from offering the funded hours, and this is raising real concerns about the long-term capacity and choice for parents. And we must remember that behind these figures, there are real families, real providers and parents struggling to find places, and staff working under tremendous pressure to try and keep services going. This is not a secure platform for expansion. Presiding Officer, there is also a question of funding, as we have heard. Scotland faces significant fiscal pressures, and we're being asked to support an expansion that would require billions more in spending. I do think the £500 million is low estimate there. It is also a motion that assumes economic benefits will follow, but that assumption is not guaranteed. We often hear a Quebec model cited as a good example, but that was released in times of economic growth and fiscal stability in Quebec. In Scotland, we're being asked to do the opposite and expect childcare to deliver that growth. The reverse is true. We should be cautious about relying on this aspect. Policy cannot override economic reality. But even if funding could be found, there is that serious issue we've mentioned previously about the workforce. Infant care is the most complex and resource-intensive form of childcare, and expanding that entitlement has to take into consideration the workforce. Without a credible workforce plan, further expansion is not just difficult, but it risks being undeliverable. We encourage a more responsible approach. This is not about doing less, it's about doing things properly. And responsible policy must focus on support where it's most needed, ensuring funding follows the child and prioritising working families if the intention is to support economic growth. Presiding Officer, this motion asks Parliament to expand a system that is already under pressure without a clear plan for funding or delivery, and for those reasons we cannot support the motion as drafted.
We now move on to the open debate, and to make a first speech, Callum Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. What an honour it is to have the opportunity to speak in our national parliament. Not least as the representative for Midlothian South, Tweeddale and Lauderdale, the constituency I was born in and have called home for most of my life. Now, before I come to the very important subject of this debate, I want to pay tribute to my predecessor, Christine Graham. Now, she served as MSP for this area in its various forms for 27 years and as Deputy Presiding Officer of this Parliament. She was a formidable and determined champion for her constituents. She always put people first, taking no prisoners to get results for them, even occasionally on her own side of the political aisle. She is and will remain a patriot and a champion for Scotland and for independence. I am grateful for her support and I wish her well in her retirement. Now, I wholeheartedly support this motion. The case for expanding childcare is clear and from the introductory remarks is in safe hands. I've heard it on the doors for the best part of a year, from parents from Peebles to Pennycook, Galashiels to Gore Bridge, and from the charities and providers who work with them. I've also been brought up in a household where childcare was a truly valued part of working life. My dad was a teacher. My mum, Grace, trained at Bernardo's, became a nursery nurse, a nanny, ran her own playgroup, and then built and ran her own nursery, first nursery in Peebles. All three of my children went through it. Now, I don't claim to be an expert, but I have been steeped in the importance and value of good professional childcare, in the value of those delivering it, and in the reality that they sometimes can feel undervalued. When we announced this policy during the campaign, the response from my constituency was instant. Parents welcomed the ambition, and they had questions on the how, the when, and whether it would fit their specific circumstances. The sector immediately got in touch, raising practical concerns about delivery and the workforce who would have to carry it. Our manifesto has given us the ambition and has committed funding. The opportunity now is ours to seize. Two stories from the constituency. One of the challenges parents are facing, one of the good practice that we can build on. In rural areas in particular, there are fundamental gaps in provision. A constituent in Galashiels wrote to me during the campaign. Her after-school club had closed with no local alternative, despite it being the second biggest town in my constituency. She now pays £10 a day in taxi fares to get her child to a club in Melrose so she can keep working. That is what those gaps look like in real life. It is also the cost of living in the most literal sense. Also during the campaign, though, I visited Stow Primary, a few miles up the road, where Stow Kids Club, with support from Schools Out, runs a breakfast club and an after-school club on site. Built by parents and providers, run on tight budget, it shows what is possible. Now, our ambition extends in two directions, down to 9 months and up through primary. In practice, though, those are two very different operations. Extending wraparound care to the end of primary, I believe, offers the chance to build on infrastructure and models that already exist. After-school clubs, breakfast clubs, holiday provision. It is the fastest path to real relief for working families. The Government already recognised that in the last budget, with an initial £15 million for breakfast clubs and £2.5 million for school provision, after-school provision. The work now is to make sure our investment grows to match the scale of the gap, and what works in Stow becomes the norm rather than the exception. Now, the extension down to 9 months, as we all know, is a different proposition. Staffing ratios, training and equipment requirements are all much higher. I know we will make sure we get this right, but a phased approach would get us a real opportunity to deliver benefits early while building out this capability. Whatever the phasing, though, we have to do this with the sector, not to them. Providers tell me they feel stretched and sometimes undervalued. As one put it to me, this is not just playing with children all day. It's skilled professional work, and we must treat it that way, in pay, training, career structure and regulation that fits the setting. Childminders, private nurseries and school-age providers, like Schools Out, all want to be part of this. Let's make sure we don't unintentionally undermine them, but build on what is working with them in partnership. Presiding Officer, this is one of the most significant pieces of work this Parliament will take on over the next 5 years. The expansion can be transformational. Childcare built around families, not families having to fit around childcare. It can give children the best start in life. It can support more parents into the work they want. As a party and as a Parliament, let's get this done for the families in Galashiels, Stow and in every town and village beyond. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Claire Baker, to be followed by Bob Doris. I call Claire Baker, who has 7 minutes, but we do have time in hand. Claire Baker.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. There seems to be an issue with this I'll switch to a different oh, there, it's on there. Sorry. Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I'd like to welcome the Cabinet Secretary to her new post. Every child deserves the best start in life, and every parent desires a childcare system that works with the reality of modern family life. A good childcare system should support the child's development, help reduce poverty, and give parents the flexibility and confidence to work, train and study. Scottish Labour recognises that high-quality, flexible and affordable childcare is essential both for children's outcomes and for Scotland's economy. But expansion has to be credible, sustainable and deliverable in practice. Families need a system that genuinely works for them. The SNP manifesto promised a transformational national expansion of childcare from 9 months to the end of primary school, 52 weeks a year, making life easier for families. This was a commitment, it wasn't an aspiration or an ambition, but it came without a clear timetable, without a workforce plan and without the detailed costings needed to make it credible. The first step must be to publish a fully costed delivery plan with a clear timetable for implementation. We are just beginning this Parliament session, but we know it is one where fiscal responsibility will be more important than ever. There will be difficult choices having to be made across devolved budgets, and that means we must have transparency from the outset, not simply headline announcements, but clear planning, clear funding models and clear accountability, so that Parliament can properly scrutinise delivery and the people of Scotland can have confidence in it. Ahead of the election, the now Deputy First Minister promised an additional £500 million in childcare funding. Parliament deserves to know how that money will actually be delivered, how it will be distributed fairly across local authorities and private providers, and how the Scottish Government will ensure that expansion does not simply place even greater pressure on a childcare sector that is already struggling with workforce shortages, closures and capacity constraints. Because the reality is that the current system is already under strain. Parents are struggling to access places. Private and voluntary providers warn that the funding model is unsustainable. And in some parts of the country, parents cannot even secure their third choice of nursery because of shortages in provision. The briefing we received from COSLA ahead of this debate outlines some of the pressures there are on current funding and the consequences of the tension between choice and quality. It also makes clear the need to ensure that the current model is suitable and sustainable in terms of both resource and workforce before any further expansion can be considered. Talk about expanding entitlement means little if families already cannot access the places they are promised. Any expansion of funded childcare relies heavily on the private and voluntary sector increasing capacity. And as demand rises, but that relies on sufficient capacity in every community. Without that, families are left frustrated, providers are stretched and inequalities deepen between areas where provision exists and areas where it does not. We also need to have a full discussion about the purpose of childcare and early years provision. Is the primary purpose childcare that enables parents to work, or is it nursery education which focuses on children's development and early intervention? And how do we ensure the system supports vulnerable families, including eligible 2-year-olds, where parents may not currently be in work? The reality is it's trying to achieve all these things, but that means recognising the practical implications of that ambition. For many families, especially those facing poverty or vulnerability, early years services provides much more than childcare. Early intervention at that stage can have a lasting impact on educational attainment, well-being and life chances. They can be providing speech and language support, identifying developmental concerns early, offering parenting support, reducing isolation and connecting families to wider services. But we largely run a drop-off and collect system. If the purpose of vulnerable 2-year-olds provision is to tackle inequality and support vulnerable families, we need to consider if the current model is building family resistance and capacity. And Willie Rennie, in his speech, talked about the importance of attachment in early years. And I've been speaking to education authorities, and they're telling me they are seeing a spike in disruptive, dysregulated and even violent behaviour in some young children as they're starting school. And we do need to consider how the early years offer addresses this trend and whether there's some unintended consequences in that offer that we need to be aware of. Yeah.
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm very grateful to Claire Baker for taking the intervention. I wanted to pick up on her point about the value of this to the eligible 2-year-olds, and I completely agree with her on the importance of early learning at that early point. I wonder if she would, like me, welcome the findings from the evaluation report, which I should say, Presiding Officer, I referred to as being published by DIFLI. It was in fact the Scottish Government, so I'll correct the record on that. But that demonstrated that those eligible 2-year-olds after 1 year were showing no developmental difference between the 3-year-olds that were coming in on a universal offer a year later.
Claire Baker.
Thank you. I do recognise that and I do welcome that, and I'm not in any way trying to denigrate the 2-year-old child policy, but speaking to education authorities, when last week we had the figures that released around violence in schools, and in Fife we saw a 50% increase in reporting violence in schools. And when I met with them recently, they did highlight that where they're having particular pinch points and where they're seeing an increasing trend is with younger children, the transition between nursery and school. And we need to think whether that nursery offer does prepare children for school, and are we creating any issues where families are dropping off young children and we're maybe not taking the opportunity to build the relationships between the parent and the child. And that is why in our recent manifesto we did argue for wider family support through measures such as family network hubs based on Sure Start principles that will help families access advice on childcare, employment, housing and financial support in a more joined up way. And I think the benefit of the vulnerable 2-year-old policy is, while you're supporting the child, how do we make sure the family is still involved and that the parents are still involved? And equally, if childcare is intended to support employment, then it must actually function in a way that allows parents to work. And right now, too many parents are saying it simply does not. We know that childcare costs are one of the biggest outgoings for working families, and research from Pregnant Then Screwed found that around 2/3 of mothers surveyed in Scotland said that childcare cost the same as or more than their income. Around half said it did not make financial sense for them to work, and more than a quarter relied on debt or savings to pay for their childcare. That should concern every member of this Parliament, because childcare should remove barriers to employment, not create them. And at the moment, many parents, particularly women, are reducing their hours, they're turning down promotions or leaving work altogether because the childcare costs and inflexible provision makes participation in the workplace impossible. That is damaging for family finances, damaging for economic growth and damaging for equality. We need childcare that is built around the realities of family life. That means greater flexibility, recognises the need of shift workers, single parents and families of children with additional support needs, ensures funding genuinely follows the child so parents can have meaningful choice over providers, and supports childminders and private providers who are essential to making flexible childcare possible in many communities. There is a lack of clarity around how the current 1140 hours systems works, with the Scottish Government giving money directly to local authorities who then decide what they keep for their own provision and what they then pass to partner providers. And some of those partners are saying they do not get enough to meet their costs, and they are not advertised equally by local authorities. But at the same time, I do recognise the need for local authorities to be properly funded, to provide their nursery provision, because they provide the bedrock system for many families. And we do need to see progress towards an agreement, if there's time, Presiding Officer.
Megan Gallagher, yes, this time.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and also to Claire Baker for giving way. Does Claire Baker believe that we need to relook at the guidance that was written by the Scottish Government that has led to these problems being implemented by local councils?
Claire Baker.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I understand that as in England they have made differences there, and that there is an agreement in England that leads to more sustainable rate setting and how the funding is distributed. So I do agree we need to look at this. We also need to look beyond the nursery years. One of the biggest pressures for working parents comes when children transition from nursery into primary school. And families can move from longer nursery hours into a school day that finishes in the middle of the afternoon, creating immediate childcare gaps and additional costs. And this is one of the reasons wraparound care is so important and why it has to be good quality and flexible. It's why Scottish Labour has argued for breakfast clubs and better holiday care provision to support working families and provide stability for children, because for parents, childcare challenges do not suddenly disappear when a child starts school. And I look forward to hearing much more detail about how and when the Scottish Government will be delivering that support across all our communities. So this debate is about much more than counting funded hours. It must be about whether the system genuinely works for children and families, whether it supports child development and tackles inequality, whether it allows parents to work and progress, and whether this Scottish Government is prepared to match the scale of their promises with the funding, the planning and the reform that is needed to deliver them. Thank you.
Bob Doris, to be followed by Patricia Gibson, and we do still have some time in hand.
Pleased to hear it, Presiding Officer. Can I welcome you to your position, Deputy Presiding Officer, and to the Cabinet Secretary for their position also this afternoon. Presiding Officer, this may surprise me, this is by no means my first speech in this place. However, it will be my first speech as the MSP for Glasgow, Kelvin and Maryhill, given the substantial boundary changes which were put in place ahead of the 2026 Scottish elections. It was a privilege to represent areas such as the Garngad, Springburn and Milton, which now passes on to Ivan McKee MSP. And I look forward to continuing to represent my constituents across the wider Maryhill corridor, however, and now many new communities formerly part of the Glasgow Kelvin seat. The real reason, though, for mentioning that, Presiding Officer, is it allows me to mention Glasgow Kelvin. And I want to pay tribute to CoCab Stewart, who was the MSP for Glasgow Kelvin from 2021 up until the election. CoCab was the first woman of colour elected to this place and served diligently as both a hard-working constituency MSP and as a Scottish Government Minister. CoCab will be a loss to this Parliament. Now to the substantive debate on the Scottish Government's ambition to expand early learning and childcare provision. The Scottish Government, of course, has already presided over a more than doubling of free early learning and childcare for 3- and 4-year-olds in Scotland, as well as eligible 2-year-olds. Whilst this doubling has not been without its challenges, some of which I hope to refer to during my speech, it is, of course, still a tremendous achievement, and that should not be forgotten within this debate. That achievement was driven and secured by an SNP government. However, it was delivered on the ground, not by politicians, but by early learning and childcare professionals employed by local authorities or providers in the private, voluntary and independent sectors, often referred to, as we heard earlier on, as PVI. Those 1,140 hours have been in place since 2021 by and large, and have been worth over £6,000 for every family's child each year. That has benefited my family, and we have used our hours mixed between a local authority placement and an independent provider, as we have tried to best match our family needs with the available provision. That will be a common experience for families, mixing and matching provision to best meet their own family circumstances. Flexibility is essential. The Scottish Government are, of course, aiming to move towards year-round childcare provision from 9 months old up until the end of primary school. It was a central manifesto commitment. Over £500 million has been earmarked for expenditure on that endeavour, and that will have to be kept under review as we plan forward over the next 5 years, of course. But I think we can all agree such an outcome would be both hugely welcome and transformational. Yes, indeed.
Stephen Kerr.
Grateful to Bob Doris for giving way, and as usual he's giving a very thoughtful speech about a very important matter, but he's just indicated that the government have earmarked £500 million for this expansion programme. I don't think that's what the Cabinet Secretary said. I think in the SNP manifesto it was estimated that that would be the ballpark figure, but nobody really knows, and there isn't an earmarked fund of money set apart for the purposes that Bob Doris has suggested, are there?
Bob Doris.
Well, I'll need to mind my P's and Q's with Mr Kerr for using the word earmarked in the parliamentary chamber. I think if Mr Kerr is more comfortable with ballpark figure, let's go with ballpark figure and let's move along with a degree of consensus. And I very much hope that this policy will command strong cross-party support, receive constructive and meaningful scrutiny along the way, but also have the goodwill of Parliament. The ambition to have as much childcare to fit around family needs and circumstances will be challenging. It will also be expensive, I suspect. It will require innovation, flexibility and a mixed model approach to delivery. Our councils will and must remain the cornerstone to successful delivery. Yeah.
Willie Rennie.
Bob Doris and I have got a long track record of debating this issue over many years, and he will understand, in order to have that mixed model, that we do need to have a PVI sector, a private, voluntary and independent sector that is treated on an equal basis as council nurseries. Will he pledge to support us, for all of us who want to achieve that?
Bob Doris.
I think I might say to Willie Rennie that I very specifically mentioned the PVI sector within my contribution, which shows that I think we have to acknowledge their growing importance and we have to fund them as effectively as possible. And I'll say more about that in latter contributions in my speech, but I appreciate that intervention. Our councils will and must remain the cornerstone to successful delivery. However, it will be vital to see a truly meaningful, respectful and constructive partnership with the private, volunteer and independent sectors, as well as with childminders. And I welcome that acknowledgement actually in the briefing paper from COSLA for this afternoon's debate. Whilst that partnership has often worked well, we should also acknowledge that the sustainable rate given by councils to PVI providers has been subject to much debate from the sector, who do not always feel this has been forthcoming from councils. That must be addressed, which I hope will reassure Mr Rennie. I very much hope this key relationship can be developed and the matter is indeed addressed. Any success of our transformational childcare offer will also require a major uplift in the early years and childcare workforce. That has to be considered strategically. It's a great opportunity to develop a pathway back to employment for some, often women, and an opportunity to support others to increase their working hours. Underemployment as well as unemployment is a challenge for society. Ironically, the absence of affordable childcare when required may have been a barrier for some who may now, with this policy, be able to consider employment. That new workforce may require specific, additional and transitional support.
Duncan Dunlop.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I appreciate Mr Doris's comments that this policy will certainly suit working families and the economy, but does lowering the age to 9 months, where we'll get this free childcare, impinging a child's rights to being loved and a family life. Half a child's brain development happens in the first 1,000 days of life. And broader evidence out there says the child really does need the attachment and the mixed economy, yes, of group interaction, but of having alone time with a parent really matters. This policy does seem to be pushing us away from really respecting a parent's ability to parent.
Bob Doris.
I very much welcome that intervention. It allows me to put on the record, I think the Cabinet Secretary has already said, that there's no compulsion for a parent to put their children into a childcare establishment at 9 months old. But also I'd like to acknowledge the expertise that Mr Dunlop's got, and if he has concerns in relation to that area, then you're absolutely right, Mr Dunlop, to bring them to the Parliament and work through those as part of a positive, constructive scrutiny of this policy proposal. Now, I understand that the childcare workforce increased by 8,000 to 46,000 individuals to support the doubling of early years provision, and that colleges were supported to assist with the upskilling of the sector. Well, I hope those stats are right, because we're on the Scottish Government website anyway. Many more will now be needed to expand early years childcare further. Well-paid and supported workers will be central to delivery of this commitment. Anything we can do to address the associated costs and make it more affordable would be very welcome. Let me make one suggestion. Perhaps the Scottish Government could reach out to the UK Government to look at changing rules over employers' national insurance contributions when employers seek to expand their early years workforce. Such dialogue and potential cooperation between the Scottish and UK Governments should be the norm and supported cross-party in this place, irrespective of our constitutional positions. And I hope on those kind of things we can start to make some common cause. After all, moving someone into employment or providing someone with further hours reduces the benefits bill, it bolsters the tax base, and it is a better outcome for all involved. The cost to an employer, however, for NI contributions could cost as much as £2,800 each year. I want to say a little bit in closing about wraparound childcare and all-year-round childcare for young people of primary school age. Breakfast clubs, after-school clubs and holiday clubs have been a mainstay for many years now. Some provision will look like a more traditional after-school club, and there's also the growth of an emerging additional provision based around different activities such as football and dance, particularly provided in the summer holidays. In my constituency, I am lucky to have various providers such as Summerson After School Care, Maryhill Mobile Creche, Achieve More Scotland and North Kelvin Sports, to name just a few. There are huge opportunities to expand provision in exciting and innovative ways. However, it will also have to be coordinated, both in terms of how and when delivery will take place, but also with regards to funding, which can come from different pots of cash, for instance the SFA's Extra Time Initiative partnership with the Scottish Government. Local organisations offering different opportunities and models of delivery, often with very different cost bases, it has to be said, must be seen as partners and not competitors. Planning will be crucial. Given the time I've taken up, Presiding Officer, I'll draw my remarks to a close here, but I hope we can come together as a Parliament and deliver this transformational Scottish Government policy.
Thank you, Mr Doris. You've helped us make up time. Patricia Gibson, to be followed by David Smith.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I congratulate you on securing your place. I am delighted to speak to this motion in the name of Mary McCallum. These proposals are radical and will take some time to fully come to fruition, but they must be welcomed for the support that they will deliver for our young families. Early learning, nursery education is extremely important because all the evidence shows that children who benefit from early learning in positive settings, such as a nursery, tend to have better, longer-term successful outcomes. It's also important not just in supporting young mums into work, but in ensuring that young mums already in work can stay in work. So well-funded, flexible childcare is good for parents, it's good for children, and it's good for our economic growth. But I think at this point it's important to say that many mums, and I say mums because most of the child caring does fall to mums, let's remember that most mums would love to have the opportunity to stay home and be full-time carers for their children. But too often, that's not financially viable, although that too is work. We all know that childcare is extremely expensive, and what we don't want to see is a situation where a parent has to stop working because the cost of childcare that meets the needs of the family is prohibitive, and I'm pleased that the Cabinet Secretary addressed that point in her remarks. The 1140 hours of high-quality childcare which parents can access, worth up to £6,000 per year per eligible child, is welcome. But I am delighted that the Scottish Government is going further to reflect the needs of hard-pressed working parents. Like others, as we've heard today, I also have spoken to parents who found that returning to work full-time after maternity leave posed practical and financial difficulties that the current system does not address. So, the SNP commitment, the transformational offer of year-round childcare from 9 months old until the end of primary school, backed by over £500,000 of new investment, will be a real boon to those parents and to all working parents and parents trying to get into the workplace, perhaps after a period of absence or perhaps even for the first time. And it will help them to find the appropriate and affordable childcare. It will help them deal with that problem that they face on an ongoing basis. We're aware, anecdotally, of parents who find the current childcare arrangements simply doesn't have the flexibility built in that they need. A new system which will fit around families instead of families having to fit around the system, including cross-border childcare placements, is exactly what working parents have been asking for. And I am pleased that in the early days of this new SNP government that the Cabinet Secretary for Education is announcing these new plans, and I know that will hearten many parents who have been struggling. And I am sure the Cabinet Secretary will make sure that the current providers are part of conversations as this initiative is rolled out. Of course, capacity, as we've heard, is an issue, and I know the Cabinet Secretary is mindful of building workforce capacity in the early learning sector to deliver this childcare commitment. And perhaps we could have a little bit more detail on that, how this might work and what the timeline might be. And I agree with the comments made earlier by my colleague Callum Kerr that very often early learning education and childcare is undervalued as a service. And unfortunately, that's just the world that we live in. So I wonder if the Minister or the Cabinet Secretary has given consideration about what might be done to further professionalise that important sector. This is all part of a wider package of measures, and I'm glad to see that this is taking place, and it's good to see that provision has been made for improved wraparound activities to expand after-school clubs. This isn't just good for further supporting children's social skills, It also has a vital role to play in developing children's confidence and offers them more options than, unfortunately, sitting in front of a screen. Anything that takes children away from screens, anything that takes them away from social media is good for their mental health. Living in the real world, making and mixing with friends, discovering and developing hobbies and latent talents helps foster happy, healthier young children who will have much more positive outcomes and much better mental health. And if you'll indulge me, Deputy Presiding Officer, I want to say a word about the expansion of the breakfast clubs, which is all part of this larger package of measures, a universal offer by August 2027. We all know that hungry children do not learn well, and making sure a healthy, nutritional breakfast is available is a key aspect of raising attainment and working to level the academic playing field for young people. This, together with free school meals for primary children up to primary 5, the Best Start grant, which helps parents equip their child with essentials for the new school year, the school clothing grant alongside the Best Start food payments, not to mention the Scottish Child Payment, all helps to ease the financial burden on families during these difficult times. Now, I know that free school meals for all primary school children from primary 1 to 5 took time because you have to build capacity, but I wonder if there's any further detail that can be provided about when the offer can be extended to include primary 6s and 7s. Taken together, the commitment of this government to our young people and the focus on supporting household budgets, which remain under such pressure, this level of support is unprecedented. Now, as someone who grew up in deep poverty, I can barely imagine the impact this kind of support would have had on my childhood and that of my siblings had it been available. The measures being taken by the Scottish Government to support families is not and should not be considered a silver bullet, but what it will do is chip away at the barriers that too many young people face, level the playing field just a little bit, incrementally helping them to reach their potential and develop their talents by removing some of the everyday barriers and access to early learning, making sure they have access to nutritional food in school, making sure they have a new school uniform for the new school year, making sure they have the essentials they need. Because I know, after 25 years in secondary teaching, I know that not having these things can scar children's school experience, and it can create very clear and very obvious social barriers in our schools, which does not support learning. So I very much welcome these proposals and the support for families they provide, and applaud their early inclusion for funding in the 2026-27 budget.
Thank you. David Smith, to be followed by Claire Haughey, and David Smith is making his first speech.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. May I start by congratulating you on your election to be the Deputy Presiding Officer and the Cabinet Secretary to her place as well. I also want to extend my thanks and welcome congratulations to all other members within this Parliament. I'd also like to thank my family and friends for their love and support during the election campaign, and everyone who has been working within the party over the last few years to get us all elected. I'm here to represent the West of Scotland region, and therefore I give a very special thanks to everyone from our region for all their incredible efforts so far. With respect to childcare, 9 months to me seems incredibly young. I remember when my oldest children were grown up. They were fortunate enough to be able to stay at home with their mum. My youngest child, she went to a childminder, and she would fondly describe a childminder as her best friend. And this went on for a number of years. But what we have seen with respect to funding from the Scottish Government over a large number of years is that policies are created, they sound fantastic, but they often short-change the providers at the end. So private nurseries are struggling to deliver funded hours sustainably, and that's resulted in a significant loss of childminders and places. And staff are under incredible amounts of pressure, and many of them are leaving the sector. So I have a quote from the National Day Nurseries Association saying that 7 out of 10 private and third sector nurseries in Scotland say the rate for 3- and 4-year-olds hourly rate, which is the 1,140 hours we've been talking about, does not cover their costs. The estimated average shortfall is £1.25 per hour per child, and this equates to £1,425 across the year for that placement. Our position has been made very, very clear by my colleague Angela. We think that what the Scottish Government needs to begin on with now, more than ever, is fixing the system that's already in place, and that needs to be done before any expansion. I appreciate the time, but I'm going to keep my contribution short and leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Claire Hockey.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and can I welcome you to your new role, and also to the Cabinet Secretary and Minister. And as this is my first speech of this session, I'd also like to give my thanks to the people of Rutherglen, Cambuslang, Halfway and Blantyre. This is the third time that they have elected me to this place, and it's an honour and a privilege to continue to serve my home community. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak in this important debate. All of us know that a child's earliest years are the most crucial for their development, and high-quality childcare can act as a critical catalyst to provide the cognitive stimulation, social interactions and emotional scaffolding needed during the formative years. Early years environments are where first friendships blossom, curiosity and independence are encouraged and developed, and opportunities to learn and grow are provided and nurtured. As children get older, school-aged childcare can continue to provide a wide range of developmental benefits for children. Social and emotional learning can be enhanced through peer interaction, physical and mental well-being can be supported, and cognitive development can be boosted via enriching and stimulating activities. And of course, school-aged childcare supports employment and the economy, and that secure and sustainable employment helps lift families out of poverty. I was the Minister for Children and Young People when the near doubling of funded early learning hours came into force. And the difference that has made for families in my constituency and across Scotland is hard to overstate. For a start, if families still paid for these childcare hours, it would cost them more than £6,000 a year for each eligible child. And in my Rutherglen and Cambuslang constituency, Scottish Government funding brought two brand new purpose-built nurseries, Millburn ELC and Lightburn ELC. And like all the providers in my constituency, they sit right at the heart of the communities that they serve and provide high-quality learning environments. On my last visit to Lightburn ELC, it was a gloriously sunny day, and children were making the most of the carefully planned and curated outdoor play resources. I spoke to staff about projects relating to their mission to create a nurturing, rights-respecting environment for the children in their care. And it's a wonderful environment with highly qualified and expert staff. Presiding Officer, the 1140-hour expansion, including the construction of brand new facilities like those in my constituency, took place in an extremely difficult context, that of a global pandemic, Brexit and periods of historical high levels of inflation. All factors which undoubtedly had significant impacts on national government, local government and the childcare sector as a whole. And the Scottish Government took action to support the sector, for example, by providing over £35 million of dedicated financial support during the pandemic and by providing 100% rates relief to day nurseries. Ultimately, the expansion was as successful as it's been because of the combined efforts of the Scottish Government, local government and the childcare sector. Infrastructure projects were completed, the ELC workforce was significantly expanded, and local authorities and PVI providers worked together to offer flexibility to families in time for the statutory implementation in August 2021. By that time, all eligible families were able to be offered funded places, a hugely significant achievement, particularly when so many capital projects were required to meet the need. And by contrast, I was very interested to watch conversations about the rollout of a childcare expansion in England. The Chief Executive of the Early Years Alliance described providers being forced to bear the brunt of parents' understandable disappointment when the sector ran into capacity challenges. He set the blame squarely at the door of the UK Government for a lack of the consultation and investment that was needed to make it work. It's always been a key plank of the Scottish Government's childcare plans to ensure that the delivery of our priorities is supported by a sustainable, diverse and thriving sector. The development of new entitlements, such as those we're talking about today, must and will be done hand in hand with existing providers, local authorities and parents and carers, conducted at a sustainable pace, mindful of the existing landscape and based on a robust evidence base. And I'll take Mr Mara's intervention.
Mr Mara. I thank the member for giving way. Does she share my concerns that in the initial costings that seem to be set out for this policy, it's based on a lower level of uptake than it has been equivalent in the rest of the UK? So for the early years, the very earliest of years, we are assuming on the development of the costings for this policy there will be a lower uptake in Scotland than in the rest of the UK. Does that cause her some concerns?
I thank Mr Mara for that. In fact, it's really interesting listening to this debate because we've heard arguments from both sides of the chamber about 9 months is too early for children to be going into childcare. I know Mr Mara is worried about that the costings are not correct. I'm sure the Cabinet Secretary will take all of this into account in our discussions with the sector, with COSLA and local authorities as we move forward. But I have no doubt there will be challenges on the way, but they have to be worked through as we progress this offering and this expansion of childcare, not only to the early years but also to the later years into primary school. The Scottish Government, working with its partners, has already done this through the delivery of 1140 hours, and we've put in the hard graft and we've built the foundations to do it again. And we've continued to make progress supporting the creation of new childminding businesses and investing in wraparound care. Around 7,000 children and families most at risk of living in poverty now benefit from school-aged childcare programmes. And today we're not starting with a blank slate. We're building on a knowledge base, have already considered the frameworks needed to grow the capacity and support the sector, and are building on the framework of engagement to make sure our commitments reflect the needs and views of children, families and our communities. Sorry, I thought someone was trying to intervene on me there. Apologies. Presiding Officer, things are tough out there for families. I'm proud that the Scottish Government's record of doing this can support them through tough times caused by factors such as the pandemic, Brexit and the cost of living crisis. Every child in Scotland deserves the best start in life, which is why we're committed to eradicating child poverty and giving families the support that they need. We've delivered ambitious, successful changes in the ELC sector before and in childcare. It's made a huge difference to families across our country, and I'm confident that we're ready to do it again.
I call Paul McLennan to be followed by Q Manavanan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I welcome you to your position and the Cabinet Secretary and Minister to theirs. As the SNP MSP for the now really named East Lothian Coast and Lammuirs, can I first of all thank voters for placing their faith in myself. I'm proud to stand here and talk about one of the most important things we can do as a community, and that's giving every child the best possible start in life and supporting every family in my constituency and across Scotland. When I spoke to the many parents during the election campaign in Prestonpans, in Dunbar, in North Berwick, Harrington and Long Nidri, and of course across rural communities in Lammuirs, the same things came up time and time again. The cost of living, the juggle of work and family, and the desire to give our kids every opportunity. That's why the SNP childcare expansion matters so much to East Lothian families. Now, I'm going to show my age here. Like so many others in the past, I had to rely on grandparents to help bring my kids up. It was tough bringing kids up then, and it still is now. But we've already delivered a transformation. The Scottish Government doubled the funded early learning and childcare entitlement to 1140 hours a year for every year for 3- and 4-year-olds and eligible 2-year-olds. That's around 30 hours a week during term time, and it's real practical help worth thousands of pounds to the average family every single year. We've heard the figure of £6,400 being mentioned. In East Lothian, our council and local providers, nurseries, childminders and community groups have worked hard to make this flexible and high quality so it fits real family life. And just next week I've got a meeting with the council where I'll be discussing this very issue. Now, in East Lothian, this will involve capital investment into buildings, as it did with 1140 hours, resource investment into staff, and of course recruitment and training of staff. And we've heard the importance of the PBI sector, and I think that's worth mentioning and continue to worth mentioning as we look at further expansion. The Cabinet Secretary. Yes, of course.
Mr. Kerr? Paul McLean for giving way, but does he not acknowledge, because I'm listening carefully to what he's saying about the situation in his own constituency, but doesn't his experience reflect the experience, for example, of Callum Kerr, who gave a very thoughtful speech, and indeed Patricia Gibson, when they identified the gaps there are in the provision that's available currently, and also the lack of flexibility for working families?
On that point, and I think one of the key things that we're touching on is about co-production, and that has to be with the sector, but it also has to be with parents and other groups in terms of that. But I'll come on to that point later on in my speech, Mr Kerr. So as I said, that includes working with the PBI sector, and the Cabinet Secretary has highlighted other areas of discussion that will be part of the process moving forward, and I think the co-production is an incredibly important part of that. Now, I've seen the difference 1140 hours makes. I've heard it on the doorstep. I heard it on the doorstep many times during the campaign, as I'm sure we all did. Parents who can now return to work or study with confidence, mums and dads who have that bit more breathing space. One of the important things as well, of course, is children who are thriving in a nurturing environment, learning through play, making friends and getting ready for school. This is despite the progress of, obviously, the challenges we faced over the global pandemic a number of years ago. So what does this expansion mean? Of course, the SNP will deliver the next big leap. It's a transformational expansion of childcare from the 9 months right through the end of primary school. It's available 52 weeks a year. And that means wraparound care before and after school, breakfast clubs I've heard about, holiday provision, and proper support for childminders and all type of providers. Coming back to the point that Mr Kerr mentioned, we're backing this with a ballpark figure of £500 million investment. For East Lothian Coast and Lammermuirs, this is huge. East Lothian and Coast and Lammermuirs is one of the fastest growing areas in Scotland. Young families are choosing to settle in East Lothian because of our schools, our coasts, our communities and our quality of life. But many parents still face real pressures. That's commuting into work, and of course we have to have that flexibility when some trains are leaving at 7 o'clock in the morning, not getting back to 6 o'clock at night. It's working in local tourism, it's agriculture or it's small businesses, or simply just trying to make ends meet. So this expansion will be a game changer. It's a parent in Dunbar and East Lothian who spoke to me saying able to go back to work when their 9-month-old will get high quality living care. Families in Preston Pans with primary age children no longer scrabbling for expensive after school arrangements. Working mums and dads across Longniddry able to balance out career and family without losing out financially. And better support families for families with additional needs and more flexibility for everyone. Of course, this isn't just about childcare, it's about tackling child poverty, it's about closing the attainment gap, and it's about supporting women back into work or training, and it's about growing our local economy. For far too long, lack of childcare has been a blocker on economic growth. On an alternative, if we can look at increasing childcare, this is obviously going to be a help growth in our local economy. High quality early learning helps every child, especially those who need it most, to develop socially, emotionally and cognitively. We know that delivery is key. This is a fundamental in times of tight fiscal management. That's why there's already been £1 billion a year investment in the current programme and worked in partnership with local authorities to pay staff the real living wage. Now, as a local MSP, I will continue to work closely with East Lothian counselling providers and parents to make sure this next phase is delivered smoothly and sustainably here in our communities. The next phase must be delivered in partnership with parents. It must be a model of co-production. East Lothian Council brought changes in last year and it highlighted the need for closer cooperation, and I pledge to continue working with parents' reps moving forward. So to the parents and carers here today, I see the demanding work you do every single day. The SNP as a party has consistently put families first. We delivered 1,140 hours and now we're ready to go further. Flexibility and capacity is key, as we've all heard today. To everyone else in East Lothian Coast and Lammermuirs, the Government will deliver the big ambitious changes that will actually make life better. It means continuing the progress that is already transforming lives across our towns, villages and countryside. Together, in this Parliament, let's make East Lothian and Scotland the best place in these islands to raise a family. Thank you.
I call Kew Manavanan to be followed by Laura Mitchell, both of whom are making their first speeches.
Thank you so much. The Deputy Presiding Officer, Cabinet Secretary, my warmest congratulations to you both. I know that I personally, it is a profound honour to be speaking for the first time in this Parliament by the grace of my constituents, my family and my lovely Green colleagues, as well as colleagues from every other party who've cared for me during this time. When I made my first affirmation last week, I said that I was doing so for the people of Scotland and their care, and this motion, I'd say, is precisely what I had in mind. Childcare is not an ancillary issue. It is the load-bearing wall of our economy and the future of our communities. And right now, that wall has cracks in it. And as we've heard often enough today, the Pregnant Then Screwed survey found that for half of Scottish mothers, it simply does not make financial sense to go to work. Half. A part-time nursery place for a child under 2 costs on average £133 a week. There is no funded entitlement for that age group. Right now, we are doing less than England, and families are paying the price. The Scottish Government's own Victoria Quay building had its staff nursery closed down last year. Prior to my election, for years, I have sat in community halls and union meetings and drop-ins across Edinburgh and heard these difficult stories directly, and it's them who I speak for. A healthcare assistant who said that her shift starts at 7 told me her entitlement only applies if she works 9 to 5. A lone parent in Leith who wanted to retrain, whose life could have changed, but couldn't find a nursery place for her 14-month-old. A grandmother in Musselburgh who became a full-time unpaid carer not because she chose it, but because there was no affordable alternative. These are not fringe cases. These are the centre. And the Scottish Government and the Scottish Greens support this motion and welcome the Cabinet Secretary's willingness to collaborate. And together we must go further. We went to this election with the most ambitious offer of any party, 1,140 funded hours for all 2-year-olds, regardless of working status, and 570 hours for every child from 6-month-old, not means-tested, not conditional, but universal. Because conditionality, too, has costs. Administrative overhead, take-up gaps, cliff edges that cut family off the moment a parent's hours change. 26 of Scotland's 32 local authorities report gaps in provision. And in 19 of those, gaps fall specifically on 1- and 2-year-olds. Universality is not charity or generosity, it is cost efficiency. And on cost, and we know that the affordability argument has come up ample times today, and yes, full expansion is expensive, but expert groups and economists have shown that early years investment produce the highest economic return of any stage in the education system. Removing childcare barriers for parents will add hundreds of millions annually to the Scottish GDP if paired with adequate employability support. A funded entitlement that only works 9 to 5, term time only, is not a real entitlement. 43% of mothers in Scotland work part-time on shifts on evenings. We know this. Any expansion must include flexible delivery, childminder networks, community settings, extended hours, or it will only work for some families and not others. The question is thus not whether we can afford to do this, but whether we can afford to keep not doing it. And alongside bridging this disparity that we've discussed between the PVI and LA salaries, we cannot expand childcare without fixing the wider workforce crisis that exists in education, health and social care sectors, which will determine whether any of this is deliverable in the first place. Presiding Officer, 4 in 5 care workers are women. A high proportion are also international workers, comprising 32% of the average social care organisation's workforce. For some organisations who responded to the Scottish Care Survey's survey, reported that international workers are covering 90% of shifts. Too often their work is devalued and an afterthought. Indeed, some respondents to this survey, some organisations working in exactly the spaces we're talking about today, said, I quote, British nationals do not want to work in care, which is a damning indictment on both the state of the care work sector and our treatment of British women and immigrants alike. And these are the people that the care system depends on. And they are disproportionately excluded from the entitlements we are debating today. By non-standard hours, by eligibility rules tied to visa status, by a system not designed with them in mind. We need fair work conditions, a sectoral pay agreement, a funded training pipeline, and I would ask the Minister, when she closes, to give the Parliament an update on when the workforce strategy will be published. Presiding Officer, as every member of this chamber has been violently informed over the past few weeks, I am an immigrant, with members of the chamber calling for my investigation, deportation and removal. But when I came to Scotland, I was introduced to a version of this country that's beautiful and kind and all-encompassing in ways no other place I've ever known is. A country that believes that anyone who is here deserves the right to live a full and dignified life. And I worked for that belief, and in return I asked for something I don't think is unreasonable. I ask for a Scotland that is kind, that cares for its children, that looks after the people who need it most, that does not open every conversation about childcare with cost or market or economic efficiency, but that starts instead with what I believe every single person in this chamber actually agrees on, that children deserve the best start, that mothers deserve to be supported. And can we please begin there? Let's begin from that common ground and then work outwards towards our differences and hopefully at some point resolve them. And I do not know every member of this Parliament quite yet, and I know that, but I am choosing to believe that everyone here came to do some kind of good. And that's the Scotland I came here for, and can we please try to be worthy of it? Thank you.
I call Laura Mitchell. Remind members that there shouldn't be any interventions during this speech, and following that we'll be moving to closing statements. Laura Mitchell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It is a privilege to stand here as the new MSP for Murray, the community that raised me and the place that I love. I will work every day to repay the trust that voters in Murray have placed in me, and it is particularly special to be the first constituency MSP for Murray to have grown up in Murray. And I hope that young people in Murray see this as proof that they belong here in this building. I, of course, want to pay tribute to my predecessors. Richard Lochhead represented Murray for almost 2 decades, served in this Parliament since 1999 and served in government under 4 First Ministers. He was part of that historic first ever SNP cabinet. Throughout my campaign, people spoke to me of their deep affection for Richard, and many expressed sincere sadness at his decision to stand down, which is testament to the way in which he served the people of Murray over so many years. I also want to recognise the late Margaret Ewing. Margaret was a passionate, determined and fierce advocate for her constituents and for Scotland's cause. To follow in their footsteps is a privilege, and to represent the best constituency in Scotland is a responsibility I take very seriously. I promised the good folk of Murray that I would be a strong voice in our community in this Parliament, and so today I want to focus my contribution on how the SNP government's ambitious childcare plans, if we get them right, could be transformative for the young people, the families and the businesses that I am here to represent. Murray punches well above its weight in its contribution to Scotland's economy. We're home to world-class manufacturers and iconic food and drink producers, Johnstons of Elgin, Walker's Shortbread, Baxter's, and of course Speyside is the spiritual home of Scotch whisky. But our greatest strength is our people, resilient, community-minded, determined people who want to build a good life for their families. And that's exactly what today's debate is about, giving people the support they need to build that good life for their families. Investing in childcare is not just about childcare. It's an investment in our infrastructure, it's an investment in our economy, and it is central to tackling some of Murray's biggest challenges. Scotland's gender pay gap sits at just under 10%. In Murray, it's almost 15%. We know that women still shoulder most of the caring responsibilities in our communities. And without affordable childcare from 9 months, without after-school clubs and holiday provision, too many women will continue to lose earnings, lose opportunities, or leave the workforce entirely. I've spoken to so many families in Murray whose experience is just that. And the impact goes far beyond individual families. Businesses across Murray tell me that childcare is a major recruitment and retention issue for them. In the lead-up to the election, Murray Chamber of Commerce set out its ambitious plans and key asks to grow and diversify our local economy. And that plan was clear. Expanding access to childcare provision is vital to growing Murray's economy. As we've heard a lot today, childcare is also a pressing cost of living issue. We know families are struggling with more month than money, and childcare costs are putting a real strain on many family budgets. In Murray, where annual pay is amongst the lowest of any local authority in Scotland, childcare is one of the biggest bills many households face. For lots of families in my constituency, childcare costs will be as much as their mortgage or their rent. That is why affordable childcare matters. But flexibility matters too. The nature of our local economy means that many parents work shifts, and the Cabinet Secretary is right to say we need a system that fits around families and not the other way around. I'm proud of the progress that has been made by the SNP and Government delivering on the 1,140 hours that are fully funded, which has truly made a difference to households across the country. Over 7,700 young people in my constituency have benefited from that universal provision, and families have saved thousands of pounds. But it's right that ministers have the ambition to go further, to expand the childcare offer to 9 months, to deliver on wraparound care and to support families during the school holidays. to give parents more freedom to work if that is what they choose. As we progress with plans to widen our childcare offer, it's vital that we get this right. That means working alongside local authorities, but also private providers, without whom funded childcare would be undeliverable in constituencies like mine. It also means ensuring we have the skilled workforce in our rural communities to deliver equitable access right across the country. And it means learning from organisations like Flexible Childcare Services Scotland, who run the excellent Strathyla Children's Centre in my constituency. Every family deserves the support they need to build a good life. If we get this right, the benefits will be enormous for Scotland's children, for women, for families and for Scotland's economy. Thank you.
We now move to the first of closing speeches, and making their first contribution, I call Yi Pei Chow Turvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officers and colleagues. I am humbled and proud to be here today to serve the residents of North East of Scotland. And that's thanks to our helpers, family and friends, and also people on the doorsteps who remember the good days of Mike Rumbles, Nicole Stephen, Alison McInnes, and also certainly Robert and Malcolm. Indeed, the Scottish Liberal Democrats are back in the North East of Scotland. And I hardly believe in your ability to be there alongside the residents and work for them and with our businesses and education institutions or industry and our third sector. But one topic which makes me wanting more than everything to help people with as fast as possible to have a better life and a fairer life is the debate we are having today on the motion on childcare. Colleagues, I hope we are all aware of the fact that the United Kingdom has the highest cost for childcare compared to the rest of Europe. And that's one of the reasons our economy is not progressing the way it should be. When parents have to stop working or reduce hours or take a step back in their careers, that's not right. It is not right that they are only be able to work the hours and the times they can, or need to fit childcare around the hours the job demands them to do. And many parents wait 3 years between children to afford the childcare, or some do night shifts and weekend shifts to take turns to cover the childcare, or some have to move closer to their relatives or make their relatives move closer to them. I was surprised when the SNP manifesto landed with the promise of free childcare or support on childcare from 9 months onward. Maybe a little bit delighted because, that's something I've wanted to see for a long time. But I also wonder why it took them so long to see the cost of childcare being a monroe in the achievement for a fairer society and help to grow our economy. Colleagues, 19 years in government, the babies born when the SNP arrived in power can have babies of their own now. No, our goals with the Scottish Liberal Democrats seems to not be as fancy and as affordable. That's because we budgeted the cost of our manifesto promises. We know, in my ward, the average cost for 8 to 5 p.m., 5 days a week, is around £1,750 without the 1140 hours. So I question the budget we have tabled for cover that childcare for 9 months. We know at the Scottish Liberal Democrats that free breakfast clubs is nearly impossible to deliver in a rural region. And any of you who work in any rural council will know that as well. We know the help with the childcare needs to be serious, fair, and help parents to work or go back to work. I know as a councillor as well, in one of the most underfunded councils, that decision that we make here in Holyrood cascade down to local governments, but the cost for underfunded council to deliver these decisions are unfair depending where you live in Scotland, and increase the risk for localities to which are overstretched already, to have to find saving elsewhere. As Scottish Liberal Democrats, I will scrutinise that those promises and the funding to deliver them follow. I will fight for all the hard-working families and their network of support, grandparents, friends, nurseries, to be able finally to aim and achieve the choice in life, and finally to feel that they are treated with fairness and equalities.
I call Stephen Kerr to be followed by Holly Bruce.
Deputy Presiding Officer, I have to say that I have actually been greatly encouraged by the contents of many of the first speeches given by SNP members and Green members in this debate, because they have indeed focused on the real issues that bedog this, the current system we have in terms of capacity and availability and so forth. And frankly, I welcome the more scrutinising approach from the members. I specifically would mention again Callum Kerr and Patricia Gibson's speeches, because I thought they were very valuable. Because I did intervene on Paul McLennan to invite him to follow suit, but he was unprepared to do so. Can I just say to the SNP members, the government benches, it's all right to say, yeah, we've made some progress, but we can do better. There are things that we need to fix. There are things that don't quite work for everyone. That's okay. You're allowed to do that in a parliament where even I'm allowed to do that. The deputy first minister is encouraging me to continue in the pattern of my previous contributions in this parliament, which is to highlight when things go well, but to generally point out where we can do better, and that's what I wish to do in this speech. And I just want to say that because I believe in repentance, I welcome much of what's been said from the front bench, the government front bench this afternoon. Because, you know, for the last 5 years, Deputy Presiding Officer, it was my colleagues in the Scottish Conservatives that were pointing out all of the issues that are now being acknowledged. It's quite delicious, actually, to witness ministers now standing before Parliament proclaiming the virtues of parental choice, flexibility and childcare built around family life, because it's quite a conversion. But as I say, I believe in repentance, and I believe in such conversions, and so I welcome it. 5 years late, but nevertheless, I welcome it, because these I'm delighted to give way to Keith Brown.
Keith Brown.
Intervention and say, on the subject of repentance, given that your party proposes a £1 billion cut to the Scottish budget in terms of tax cuts, and today said it wants to abolish LBTT, how does he propose to fund the requests that he has, and will he repent from those stupid decisions of the past?
Thank Keith Brown for his very helpful intervention. Because, and I don't know why you were all applauding that, because frankly your government, the government of the SNP benches, has committed to a greater than £1 billion cut in the cost of the public purse. And I look forward to Ivan McKee, Ivan the Terrible, as my colleague Murdo Fraser has now christened him, to bringing forward these proposals. And at that time, perhaps, Keith Brown will repent of pouring scorn on the idea that we can do more with less. I give way to Ivan the Terrible.
Call Mr McKee, and can I remind members that nicknames should not be made in the chamber.
Just to help Stephen Kerr with his arithmetic, anything that they're proposing on those benches, of course, is in addition to anything that we're already taking forward, and that needs to be factored in when he's considering the impact on public service funding.
There's already an identified £5 billion gap in the government sums, and so I look forward to Ivan McKee bringing forward his radical proposals for public sector reform that, as I said a moment ago, mean, and I hope he recognises that this is a valuable economic rule, that we do more with less. because, as I say, these are the arguments the Scottish Conservatives have made, and I don't repent of those at all in response to Keith Brown's intervention, because these policies matter. This is not social policy simply. This is not economic policy simply. Putting it together, we're advocating a childcare system that works, that enables fathers and mothers, both parents in the household, to return to work, increase hours, pursue careers, support their families and contribute to economic growth. And I know that's an anathema to the Scottish Greens, but I'm delighted to see a consensus forming across the chamber on the need for economic growth. More people in work means higher productivity, stronger businesses, a broader tax base and stronger public finances to sustain the services that we all rely on. And that's not ideology. It's practical economics. It's common sense. Now, in the time I've got left, I will very quickly go to the questions I wish to ask the Cabinet Secretary, because this has got to be more than a press release or a few lines in a manifesto. So where's the detail? Ministers promise support for every child. But what does that actually mean? Is this full provision for everyone or something tapered according to income? Will support be prioritised for households where both parents work? What exactly are ministers proposing? It's not clear. So where is the workforce plan that was mentioned earlier? A third of nurseries already report staff shortages. We can't announce a huge childcare expansion and simply hope for staff to appear. Where is the plan to recruit, train and retain the workforce needed to make this credible? Where is the implementation timetable? Ministers say this will happen over the course of the Parliament. Now, these are fine words, but we've learned to interpret that in the opposition parties, because, frankly, it can mean just about anything the ministers choose it to mean. They're fine words, but what about the milestones? Where are the milestones? How will Parliament judge whether delivery is actually happening? Yes,
I'm afraid the member's in his last few seconds, Cabinet Secretary.
Oh, it's a shame. Oh, I thought I was giving... Oh, am I not allowed to give way? Oh, all right. Sorry, I do apologise, Cabinet Secretary. I'm delighted to continue the conversation in other ways. And in my final few seconds, where is... Yes, I will. Where is the fully costed delivery model? That is my question. And in conclusion, Deputy Presiding Officer, I would say to ministers today, don't be performative. Enough of congratulating yourselves. Enough of progressive posturing without practical delivery. Well, you can all laugh, but I mean, this is the most performative government you'll ever experience. Tell Parliament how this will be paid for. Tell Parliament how this will be delivered. Tell Parliament when families strapped by failures of the current system will finally see meaningful change, because parents need childcare that works.
Thank you. I would like to call for their first speech, Holly Bruce, to be followed by Amanda Lindsay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I start by declaring an interest as an elected member of Glasgow City Council? It is the honour of my life to stand here today representing the people of Glasgow Southside, a community that has made history by choosing a bold, new, progressive direction. Our victory was built on the doorsteps of Govanhill, Pollokshields, Mount Florida, Battlefield, Shawlands, Tory Glen and the Gorbals. And it was driven by the relentless, hard-working dedication of volunteers who built a green momentum out of the very thing that defines the Southside: community campaigning and a demand for tangible change. This election defined a seismic political shift for the Scottish Greens, and we do not take that lightly. In my own seat, our campaign succeeded because we focused on proving that green politics is all about the warmth of a well-insulated home, the security of fair rent controls, the freedom of free public transport, and the stability of funded childcare. Glasgow Southside sent a clear message: social and environmental justice are one and the same, and I intend to deliver exactly that. I realised when we had done something truly special on election night. At around 9:30 p.m, a group of us were literally running about Govanhill, finishing our Get Out to the Vote operation, and a man stopped us in our tracks. He told me that he and his family of 12 had made the leap to vote Green. He ushered his wife and children to the window, excited about what we could achieve. And I'll be honest with all of you, I stood there and cried, not only due to the exhaustion, but out of hope for change. Now, I'm not bitter that Lorna Slater beat me to the history books by a mere 15 minutes to win the first ever Green constituency seat in Holyrood. I will let Lorna have that one. But jokes aside, I take the mandate from the Southside with the utmost seriousness. And my promise is not for perfectionism, but to do my best every single day for the place I call home. I want to pay tribute to my predecessor, Nicola Sturgeon, and her positive track record of serving this country. From somewhat similar beginnings, brought up in a working-class family that doesn't do politics, as well as being the first in my family to go to university and study law, I believe the Southside always pushed Nicola to be better in her politics, and I welcome the Southside to do the same for me. I also want to be clear about what the Southside rejected during this election. We saw some in this chamber resort to hostility and intimidation tactics. Glasgow Southside overwhelmingly rejected that, and I pledge to my constituents that I will stand with them to ensure that hatred never takes root. Presiding Officer, I'm sure it will come to no great surprise to the Chamber that I'm a feminist. My work on feminist town planning as a councillor within Glasgow City Council can attest to that. And now as an MSP, I will work to bring feminist lens to all areas, addressing the crisis in childcare as a necessary place to start. Audre Lorde wrote that childcare is the battleground for community survival and a collective political necessity. For too long, women have quietly provided the unpaid labour of care within our communities. And look around this chamber, into your communities and at your own friends and family, and ask yourself, who are the primary caregivers? Whose careers are put on hold? Who do you see caring for children? And who makes up the vast majority of our underpaid and under-resourced childcare workforce? They're women. And these reflections aren't to say that men or non-birthing parents do not want to care for their children, but it helps to highlight the cultural scripts that are embedded in our society due to the system that has been built to ensure business as usual. It's time we disrupt business as usual in the interests of equality. I've spent 4 years banging the drum for childcare provision in Glasgow City Council. I've worked with organisations like Engender, the Scottish Women's Budget Group and Pregnant Then Screwed on their campaigns. I did what I could do with the powers I had, but now we must go further. Just this month, Pregnant Then Screwed launched their annual summer survey. A mother in Glasgow Southside shared that it seems unfair that childcare costs so much. I've gone from being the highest earning person in the relationship to the lowest, simply because I had to go part-time, and I cannot afford full-time childcare for 2 children. Many families are told to rely on informal childcare networks, grandparents, friends, neighbours, but let's be honest, in 2026, those networks are not readily available to everyone. Proximity, shift patterns, as we've heard, ageing relatives and the right of women to pursue their own career ambitions mean we cannot use family favours as a substitute for social infrastructure. We must ensure this Parliament stays family-friendly, maintaining our creche and robust family policies so that we practice what we preach. But we also must demand that the Scottish Government makes good on its commitments to fix the issue with cross-border placements and ensure that no childcare is left to a birthday lottery. And I thank the Cabinet Secretary for accepting our Green Amendment to ensure that those immediate issues facing children in Scotland are addressed as soon as possible, and I look forward to working with her. To finish, the Green momentum is here because it feels right, it feels necessary and it feels urgent. I step into this chamber not to play the game of status quo, but to dismantle the barriers facing working-class families, women in our environment. The Southside has trusted us with their historic vote. I intend to spend every single day of this parliamentary term proving that their trust was well placed. Thank you.
Making their first speech, I call Amanda Lindsay.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and may I welcome both yourself and the Cabinet Secretary to your posts. I'd also like to thank the voters in Central Region and Lothians West who put me here. I agree that every child deserves the best possible start in life. The earliest years shape a child's future, and high-quality, accessible childcare plays a vital role in tackling poverty and supporting working parents. On that, there is common ground. But agreement ends where ideology begins. We are teaching some of our youngest children, boys and girls as young as 4, that they may have been born in the wrong body. This is not kindness. It is a profound and reckless experiment with developing minds. Children who still believe in Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy are being asked to declare a gender identity and socially transition in nurseries and primary schools. In 2017, LGBT Youth Scotland, an organisation funded by this government, produced guidance promoting social transition for children. That guidance was adopted across education. Millions of pounds of taxpayers' money have since flowed to these organisations to embed this approach. It directly contradicts the findings of the independent Cass Review, the most comprehensive examination of gender medicine conducted anywhere in the world. Dr. Cass was clear. There is no robust evidence for a trans child. Social transition is not a neutral act, and schools should not be leading children down this path. The consequences are now visible. Referrals to the Sandyford Gender Clinic in Glasgow exploded in recent years, with hundreds of children on waiting lists, some as young as 5. We are setting children on pathways to puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, infertility and surgery, interventions that Cass described as built on weak evidence and poor clinical practice. This ideology has harmed women too. In December 2022, this place passed the Gender Recognition Reform Bill, which would have allowed any male aged 16 and over to self-identify as a woman without medical diagnosis. And we saw the results in cases like Isla Bryson, a double rapist housed in a women's prison. Attempts to add basic safeguards were dismissed as bigotry. Only Westminster's use of Section 35 prevented this legislation from becoming law. Thank God for that safeguard in the Union. We still have male prisoners housed in female prisons, women referred to as chest feeders and womb havers in the NHS, and female nurses facing disciplinary action for refusing to undress in front of male colleagues who identify as women. Even after the UK Supreme Court confirmed that women in the Equality Act means biological sex. The Scottish Government's attachment to this ideology has come at a heavy cost to child safeguarding, to women's rights, to free speech and to biological reality itself. We must now change course. We should immediately withdraw guidance that promotes social transition in nurseries and schools. Nurseries. We must prioritise evidence over activism and child protection over adult feelings. The Cass Review must not be ignored. It must be implemented. This is not about prejudice. No, you laugh, but it's not. It is about protecting vulnerable children from irreversible decisions and about defending the rights of women to single-sex spaces and fair treatment. It is about refusing to lie to children about biological reality, even when that truth is uncomfortable for some. Scotland has a proud tradition of clear thinking and child-centred policy. Let us return to it. Let us put evidence, safeguarding and reality first, especially for the youngest and most vulnerable amongst us. Thank you.
A call Michael Mara to be followed by the Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I begin my first speech of this session with broad congratulations across the many people who have to be congratulated. I won't list them all, but the front bench certainly of the Government who have won a handsome victory in the election just past your own position as one of our Presiding Officers, and to the many excellent maiden speeches that have been made today. The 5 years will pass in a flash, and then people will look at you as if you know what you're doing. I still do not have a clue where the committee rooms are in terms of the different numbers. If somebody new can explain it to me, or an old hand, I would appreciate it. I was particularly impressed, I have to say, and we won't be surprised by my colleague Catherine Sangster's speech today. She touched on one of the issues about cross-boundary placements for children, which I think all of us as returning MSPs will have experienced through our casework. And I think there is an opportunity, and the consensus that the Cabinet Secretary identified in her opening remarks today, I think across many of the manifestos, not all, but many of them, it will allow us to touch on these very substantial and substantive issues for our constituents. And it's in all of those manifestos because people have told us the costs are eye-watering. People are struggling to get the support that they require, and I think it's right that this is one of the first areas of concern that the Government bring to Parliament in the first weeks of our term. I was actually struck, I think, by Maggie Chapman's example that she made about the joy of a pregnancy being limited by the thought of the cost. Little wonder that we have the lowest birth rate in our history in this country. We have to make sure that the social barriers to having families are lowered wherever they can be. But the SNP's record in this area has been, I believe, bedevilled by a lack of definition of what it actually was. I think too often we have been told that it was about the attainment gap expansion of childcare. It was about expanding female participation in the workplace. And that brings us to points I think that have been covered by many colleagues today about policy design. Because the way that you design this policy will get you different outcomes. And I actually think Megan Gallagher made a very good point about can we have an assessment of where we are, a realistic assessment at the start of this process about what has been delivered in against the last set of promises that were laid out. Let's start from that moment of truth, I think, and let's set that out. I have to say, I would come a little bit with scepticism about some of the economic side of this. I don't particularly believe that we will get a very significant economic growth just through growing our workforce. I don't agree with Stephen Kerr's definition of how that economic works. The things that have bedevilled our economic growth in this country have been, I will take it in just a moment, have been issues about productivity as well as the issues about labour force participation. Sorry, Mr Kerr, I'm going to take Megan Gallagher first of all.
I thank Michael Mara for giving way, but surely, given how much a policy of expanding childcare will cost, the more incentives that you have to get people into work grows that tax base and therefore allows us to look after these particular services, if there is consensus, of course, to do it.
So it certainly plays a role, and expanding your workforce certainly can. But the basis of our growth in this country, in Scotland over the last 40 years, has been on additional inputs rather than innovation or total factor productivity growth. So I would caution against. No, I'm afraid. Well, if we're getting time back, are we under the new regime? Yes, we are. Okay, Mr. Kerr.
Well,
thank you.
Mr. Kerr. Grateful to Michael Mara for giving way, but let's be absolutely clear. One of the key levers of improving productivity in this country are the skills of the workforce. We're talking about a significant proportion of the population, mainly women, who have skills to bring to the workplace. So I reject Michael Mara's rebuttal of my economic theory around how we improve productivity, because skilled workforces make all the difference in the world.
And I know that Mr Kerr shares my concern for the education system in this country and the fact that we want to see it improved and returned to its previous glories in terms of what it did. And the decline in international league tables has been a cause of great concern, I think, for many people in the country. But the policy design questions are already being answered by the Government. The Institute for Fiscal Studies have pointed out that by actually the application of means testing will actually limit the participation increase. So let's just, my plea in this is let's define what we want to achieve, and so that we can design the policy appropriately. And that is the only way that we will get it right. And I would touch on the issues around PVI and I think a growing consensus that issue had to be dealt with. Now, I would caution the Cabinet Secretary on this. As long as the government takes a dysfunctional approach that it has done over the last 20 years to local government, this will continue. This will continue, because local government, when they are pushed into making cuts, will make these decisions. The costs, finally, Presiding Officer, in the time that I have, they remind us, I think, that there is really important that we look at the overall budget for this, because the little exchange there was between Bob Doris and Stephen Kerr about the earmarking or the ballpark figures, I think was absolutely correct in the fact that earmarking would identify that the money had been found. The Institute for Fiscal Studies is saying that it is far from apparent where the money is coming from this. We are facing a fiscal deficit of £5 billion by 29-30. We're looking at additional spending of £1.5 billion by the end of this time. The Presiding Officer is nodding at me, Bob Doris. I'm afraid I'm going to have to end my remarks there. But thank you for this initial debate.
Thank you. Mr Murray and other members may wish to know that our committee rooms are numbered by size, which might help. Can I call Minister Siobhan Brown? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I thank all the members for all their contributions and recognise that many of us are working parents who rely on childcare. As a working mum myself, I have been juggling childcare now for over 20 years, as my youngest is only 10 years old. And I can tell you, during that time, we have come a long, long way. And 20 years ago, I had to return to work at 9 months. It was just something that I had to do. It wasn't financially viable for me to stay at home. So today's debate provides a strong foundation for the consensus. Yes, I'll take an intervention.
Ms Roddick.
I'm grateful to the Minister, and I do apologise for intervening quite so early in her speech. But I wonder if she would agree with me that it's a shame that this very necessary debate on childcare was dragged into the space of a transphobic diatribe earlier on. And would she agree with me that we should condemn that fully, and that all children, regardless of whether they are LGBTQ or otherwise, deserve the absolute best care that we can offer and the respect of all members in this Parliament?
Thank you for the member for the intervention, and I personally do not feel it was a very well-balanced reflection on this debate on childcare. So it is clear that this Parliament is open to finding the right mix of early learning, which is needed to support children's development in the early years, and a further expansion in childcare for parents, which supports their ability to take up or to sustain employment. The existing early learning and childcare programme is delivering much-needed support backed by significant investment. It is now time to deliver year-round support and provide increased support for varying working patterns. We will also improve availability of services in some areas, particularly remote and rural locations, and keep improving accessibility of services for children with disabilities and additional support needs. Yes, I will. To Andrew Baxter.
Thank you, Minister. Does the Minister recognise that one of the biggest challenges in expanding childcare in rural areas like my own constituency is actually the lack of childminders? And will the Minister investigate how we can change current regulations to allow those childminders to operate in our excellent rural community facilities rather than from their own home, which is a significant barrier for those wishing to enter the sector?
Yes, absolutely. We recognise that how vital early learning childcare, especially in rural and island areas, are. I'm not sure if the member is aware that the Scottish Government has the SCMA's childminding recruitment and retention programme, which is available in nearly all areas of Scotland. This is work that's been ongoing as we progress with the expansion of childcare. But, of course, I'm happy to meet the member if he's got any concerns on this and in the future. We've also heard that families need childcare support for a much wider range of ages, and that the cost of living challenge has further raised the barriers presented by high childcare costs for families, pushing some families out of the labour market or forcing working parents to have to reduce their hours or change their working patterns. Presiding Officer, we can only deliver our ambitious plans to expand childcare through our hard-working, dedicated childcare sector.
So let me put on record my thanks to those delivering our childcare services across the public, private and third and childminding sectors, and the Cabinet Secretary and myself hope to meet with the sector representatives soon to hear their views on our ambitious plans on expanding childcare to benefit families, children and the economy. In 2026 to 2027, we are making available £13.4 million to enable childcare staff to deliver ELC-funded hours in private and third sector providers to continue to be paid at least the real living wage. This is on top of the additional £25.7 million recurring funding that we have delivered to support previous increases. We also remain committed to growing the childminding profession to ensure that more families have access to the unique and flexible experience of childcare that childminders can offer. We have made available over £4 million of funding of the Scottish Childminding Association to deliver a national 3-year programme of childminder recruitment and retention, which is now available in 31 of the local authority areas. Firstly, can I recognise some of the first-time contributions from the debate of Catherine Sangster, Angela Ross, Callum Kerr, David Smith, Q Manivanan, Laura Mitchell, Yipi Chu Turvey, Holly Bruce and Amanda Lindsay. Thank you very much, and I look forward to working with you all in this parliamentary term. I will note some of the contributions from all of the members today. I know that Maggie Chapman and Holly Bruce did touch on this, and I know that the Cabinet Secretary has confirmed that we will support the Green Amendment today, and we look forward to early discussions with the Greens and COSLA to look at the operational implications of today's amendments in context of the wider reform of expansion and childcare. Megan Gallagher. I welcome that it's a new start and opportunities to work together. You have brought up the restrictions of the current model, and I think this is what, as we're moving forward, to have more flexibility. I can't see how it can be the current model moving forward, and this is the work that we'll be doing ongoing. Willie Rennie. Yes.
I thank the Minister for giving way on that point, and also to welcome her to her new role, and I look forward to meeting with her in due course. On the point of the current model, we need to look at the funding model. If there's any expansion that's going to be considered, you need to look at the current funding model to make sure that there's parity between the PVI sector and council-run nurseries. Is that something that she will commit to today?
We have already done a bit of significant work on this, but I will come to this just later on in my speech. If I could touch on Willie Rennie's contribution, who also mentioned what Megan Gallagher has raised there, but also the importance of childminders, and just to reiterate the work that is ongoing with the Scottish Government regarding the SCMA to deliver the 3-year programme for childminder recruitment. And I have to agree with Mr Rennie on Mr Dunlop's contribution yesterday, which was clearly very passionate about delivering the promise, and I'm sure there'll be lots of discussions on that moving forward. If I can move on to Claire Baker's contribution. Claire Baker did raise some concerns about what support was being put in place. I'm not sure if Claire Baker's aware of the early adopter communities that the Scottish Government is rolling out. These are our early adopter communities are expanding access to childcare activities and also the wider support that she mentioned to tackle poverty and improve outcomes for families. So I'm happy to send further information on that project to Claire, if that would be helpful. Claire Hockey, I'd like to thank her for all her work in her ministerial capacity, as she was really an integral part played an integral part in the initial implementation of the expansion of the 114 hours delivery when it was delivered in August 2021. A few things I want to touch on as well, if I may. I know that the cross-boundary issue has been raised by several members. We are committed to parents and carers accessing their children's funding ELC at a provider of their choice in the public, private, third or the childminding sectors. So statutory guidance is clear that wherever possible, families accessing cross-boundary placements should be treated on the same basis as families accessing provision locally. So I want families across Scotland to benefit from the ambitions set out jointly with our local government partners in Funding Follows the Child, and it has been concerning to hear of local decisions that are reported to reduce the flexibility and the choice and provide a sustainability as well. So we will consider recent developments on this issue in partnership with COSLA. One of the things that has been coming up is the funding for the PVI sector. As the Cabinet Secretary did allude to earlier on today, the Diffley report was published in just March this year, and it is important now that we take time to reflect on the findings and the sector with the local government as well. And as I said in my beginning of my speech, we are providing £13.4 million in support to local authorities to set sustainable rates that enable staff in the private and the third sector. Few people have asked how this is all going to be funded. So we are facing one of the most challenging fiscal environments in recent years. The Cabinet Secretary for Public Sector Reform, along with the Deputy First Minister, will oversee our collective response to ensuring funding is prioritised to where it has the most impact. However, we are clear about the importance of expanding childcare as set out in this debate and the potential impact on economic growth. We will prioritise funding within our budgets to ensure that expansion can be delivered, and we are committed to reprioritising an additional £500 million. There are difficult decisions, as this government contends with an exceptionally challenging fiscal context, but as evidenced today, this Parliament is in agreement that we must find ways to improving our offer to families, and I look forward to working with colleagues on these important issues. The approach we take, Presiding Officer, will reflect the needs of communities across the country. It will reduce inequalities, which will often determine who can work and who can't, and these sorts of roles that they can do. It will recognise the challenge that parents, predominantly women, across the country face every day in balancing the demands of childcare and work. And it will help to grow the economy by supporting families and allowing them to work the hours they want. Presiding Officer, investing in childcare and expanding childcare will benefit everyone in Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you. The next item of business is consideration of Business Motion 151 in the name of Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau setting out a business programme. I call on Jamie Hepburn to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
No member has asked to speak to the motion. The question is that motion 151 be agreed. Are we agreed? The motion is therefore agreed. The next item of business is consideration of two Parliamentary Bureau motions. I ask Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau to move motions 152 on Office of the Clerk and 153 on Parliamentary recess dates.
Move, Presiding Officer.
The question on these motions will be put at decision time, to which we now move. There are 6 questions we put as a result of today's business. I remind members that if the amendment in the name of Catherine Sangster is agreed to, the amendments in the names of Megan Gallagher and Willie Rennie will fall. The first question is Amendment 128.2 in the name of Catherine Sangster, which seeks to amend Motion 128 in the name of Mary McCallan on expanding childcare, be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we move to a vote. There will be a short suspension to allow members to access the digital voting system.